Chapter 370. What? Is what you said true? A young sailor exclaimed. Another slightly older sailor hurriedly asked, Captain Andre, is Miss Chloe's words true? Oh my God, it would be great if it's true. That's right, 20%. There are 450 people on the ship. Even if the other party's goods are worth 50,000 gold coins, we can at least get 15 to 20 gold coins. Heavens, that's gold coins, not copper coins, not silver coins. Just one ticket is equivalent to half a year's salary. Oh, 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 oh. I feel like all the blood in my body is boiling. Hearing that there was a huge bonus to be had, all the sailors on the deck went into a frenzy. Their eyes were bloodshot as they waited for the real boss to nod his head. Perhaps to the nobles and mages, a dozen gold coins was just a piece of clothing, a can of tea leaves, a box of high-quality tobacco, a pair of stockings made of special spider silk, and a small amount of magic materials. But to the ordinary people, it was indeed a huge sum of money. After all, most sailors only had a salary of 1 silver coin a day. Although they ate and drank on the ship and spent very little money, they still had to drink some wine and find a woman to satisfy their needs. At the same time, they had to leave some money for their families. Their lives were basically tight. Now that a windfall had fallen from the sky, it would be strange if they weren't jealous. From a certain point of view, Chloe had stirred up a huge problem. Her actions were equivalent to pouring a bucket of oil on a fire that was already burning. As for how troublesome it would be, just look at the beads of sweat on Bartholomew's forehead. If he had a choice, he definitely wouldn't have made such a bewitching speech. But it was a pity that it was all too late now. Just as the atmosphere on the ship started to turn strange, Andre lightly patted Bartholomew's shoulder and walked to the front unhurriedly. He shouted at everyone, "Silence. Crowley is right. From this moment onwards, you will receive 20% of the looted ships, no matter what cargo is on them. Furthermore, you will be able to receive double the amount of loot from the people you come into contact with during the battle. Remember, I've never mistreated any of my loyal subordinates, and I've never tolerated anyone who dares to hide the spoils of war. What are you waiting for? All of you, get ready for battle." As a transmigrator from the era of information explosion, he knew very well that there would definitely be problems if he did not give the crew a share of the loot. There was a saying that went, "Don't worry about scarcity, but worry about uneven distribution." It meant that when distributing benefits, one shouldn't worry about how much they would get, but rather about whether it would be fair. Although in this world, most sailors could only rely on their meager salary and smuggle goods to get by, and very few would have the right to share the spoils of war. However, Andre planned to plunder crazily for the next 1 to 2 months. By then, he would be able to earn an astronomical amount of money just by capturing merchant ships. If he did not share some of it with the crew, they would inevitably have some ideas. So, it was better to take the initiative to win them over. In any case, to these sailors, they were not very clear about the true value of all the goods. When the time came, he could set the price slightly lower to recoup a lot of their losses. This was not because he was overly greedy, but for the good of the crew who came from ordinary families. After all, earning a few hundred gold coins in a short period of time would only make the surrounding people envious and sigh. But if it was 1,000 gold coins, it would quickly attract the intervention of the underworld. These people would use all kinds of methods to get their hands on the glittering gold coins and would not hesitate to kill their entire family for it. In Oraire, which was full of barbarism, ignorance, and bloodshed, if one did not have the corresponding identity, status, and strength, having too much money would not bring many benefits. On the contrary, it would easily lead to a fatal disaster. Did you hear that? Great, generous, benevolent captain. I've already agreed to give you 20% of the spoils of war. Now, get the hell back to your posts. If I see anyone not fighting with their lives on the line, I'll crush their balls. Taking advantage of the fact that everyone was immersed in their sweet dreams and unwilling to wake up, Bartholomew hurriedly wiped the sweat on his forehead and shouted a series of vulgarities at the top of his voice. His posture was exactly that of a loyal lackey. However, the crew was not angry at all. Some of the guys with higher status even laughed loudly and joked, "Ha ha ha, dear Vice Captain, please rest assured, with this 20% reward, if someone is greedy and afraid of death in battle, you don't need to do anything. I'll crush their balls with my own hands." Well said. I'll take off the pants of the coward, smear some breadcrumbs on his balls, and let the seabirds slowly peck at them. Another old sailor also cracked a vulgar joke. "Wow, Carsey, you bastard are really sinister. You actually came up with such a method of torturing people. All the men in the world should hate you." Hee. If the men hate me, then so be it, as long as the women don't hate me. As the crew began to laugh and curse at each other to relieve the pressure before the battle, Bartholomew secretly let out a sigh of relief. He immediately lowered his voice and said to Chloe with a wry smile, "My young miss, do you know how much money you just made Sir Andre lose with your words? Moreover, it almost caused the entire ship to riot. Please don't make such jokes so easily in the future. I'm old, and my heart can't take it." As a retainer, he was very clear that although the two of them were connected by marriage and would become a family sooner or later, he had to stand up to protect his master's interests. Otherwise, it would be a dereliction of duty. "Is it that serious?" Chloe widened her eyes and asked innocently. "Of course, it's very serious. If it weren't for my lord's appropriate handling, we might have faced an extremely grim situation." Bartholomew had sailed on the sea for more than 30 years and had personally experienced all kinds of dangerous situations. Among them, a sailor riot was one of the most frightening emergencies, especially those who were blinded by great benefits. They could do almost anything. Often, they could turn a ship into purgatory in about half an hour. Seeing the old man's serious expression, Chloe suddenly felt a bit uneasy. She raised her head and carefully asked, "Dear, did I really say something wrong?" "Hee, you did say something wrong in the wrong place. But it doesn't matter. I originally intended to take out a portion of the spoils to share with the crew. You could be considered to have gotten away with it by accident. Next time you speak, it's best to think carefully about the consequences. Otherwise, I might start a massacre." After saying this, Andre's eyes flashed with a sharp light. His words weren't a joke, but a serious one. Chapter 371. If the sailors and barbarian warriors on the ship were to riot for some reason, there would be no other choice but to suppress them with thunderous means. Although it sounded bloody and cruel, it was indeed the most common and effective method in this barbaric and ignorant era. After all, even an 8th-tier magician wouldn't be able to carry so many people flying on the surface of the sea. Putting aside whether or not he could even carry them, just finding a place to land would be extremely difficult. Thus, suppressing the riot was the right choice. Bartholomew clearly saw the flash of coldness and instantly realized how terrifying this seemingly friendly young man in front of him was. He quickly suggested in a low voice, "Sir, in order to better control the crew, I suggest that we promote a few managers, such as bosun, field commanders, and so on. As long as we divide the crew into several factions, the situation today will not occur." Andre nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Then after this battle, pick a few brave fellows. The most powerful one will be the bosun, and the rest will be field commanders. All right, let's stop chatting. The enemy ship has entered the firing range. Prepare the bow cannon. It should be time to plunder." After saying that, he gestured to Eunice, Nina, and Winter Wolf Michelle, who were not far away. The two humans and one wolf quickly climbed up from the deck. Those who needed to buff themselves did so, and those who needed to move their muscles did so. As the target got closer and closer, when they could almost see the terrified expressions on the enemy's ship, the fuse of the bow cannon in front of the Arcane finally ignited. A few seconds later, boom, boom, boom. 3 deafening explosions reverberated on the surface of the sea. Chain bullets streaked across the air at lightning speed, hitting the masts and sails of the enemy ships. In the blink of an eye, 3 of the ships had large holes in their mainsails, causing their speed to drop by more than half. As everyone knew, speed was an important factor in naval battles, especially in the era of sail power. Once the masts or sails were severely damaged, they would instantly lose their ability to move and become an immobile target. Other than raising the white flag and surrendering, they would sink into the sea together with the ship. It was obvious that the three ships with their main sails torn had lost the ability to escape. At least, before the sails were repaired, they would not be able to move. Therefore, Andre did not hesitate to order them to continue chasing after the other two ships. However, in order to prevent any accidents from happening, he still let a few cannons filled with grape shot fire when he passed by. Only a few loud, rumbling sounds were heard, and the deck of the enemy ship was directly covered in blood. Broken limbs, broken arms, internal organs, and brain matter. In short, under the terrifying splash damage, the fragile bodies of the humans were completely unable to withstand it. All kinds of fragments were scattered everywhere, and even the shields in their hands were of no use. They were penetrated in the blink of an eye. The scene was simply too horrible to look at. It was no different from slaughterhouse. At the same time, countless holes had been shot into the white canvas, and it could not withstand the wind at all. If it had not changed to a backup sail, they could forget about continuing to sail. One had to know that great bullets were extremely lethal weapons similar to shotguns. Although the range and penetrating power were far inferior to solid lead bullets, it was definitely second to none when it came to the lethality of people. It was usually tied up in a string with a net or a gunny sack. From afar, it looked like a bunch of grapes, hence its name. Just imagine, when a heavy ball of lead was propelled by the power of gunpowder and spewed out at a speed close to the speed of sound, how much damage would it cause if it hit a person? It did not need to be much. Just one hit would be enough to kill you. Dozens of cannons were fired at the same time. The speed of destruction was like harvesting wheat. Not even a blade of grass was left in its wake. Those who survived were basically the luckiest. The only pity was that their mental state was not very good. Some were even scared out of their wits by the terrifying scene. They either sat on the spot and laughed hysterically or screamed at the top of their lungs. Some could not withstand the huge psychological pressure and jumped into the sea to commit suicide. Looking at the bloody, dismembered corpses on the opposite deck, Bartholomew took a deep breath and murmured to himself, "What a terrifying weapon. It's even more frightening than the fireballs and lightning released by mages. I hope our enemies will never be able to decipher its mystery. Otherwise, this sea will be dyed red with blood." Don't worry. These things may seem simple, but without the correct formula, I'm afraid they won't even reach 1/10 of their current power. They won't be able to be used as weapons at all. After saying that, the corners of Andre's mouth curled up slightly, a playful expression on his face. What was the biggest secret of the Eye of Arcane? It was not the more scientific and advanced hull structure, nor was it the epic-making bronze guns or cannons. Instead, it was that small, inconspicuous black gunpowder. Without the support of this thing, the combat power of the entire ship would drop by 90% in an instant. Although the formula sounded simple, with only sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter, it was almost an impossible task to figure out the correct ratio in this world where productivity was extremely backward. As long as he could ensure that no one was involved in the production process, no one would be able to decipher it for at least a few hundred years. Just as the two were talking, the cannon placed at the bow of the ship fired again. Another 3 chain bullets drew a trajectory across the sky and smashed into the sails of the last 2 ships. Although one of them did not hit the target, the mission was completed perfectly. That was because the flagship of the opponent, a large ship with a displacement of about 800 tons, had the large horizontal sail fixed to the main mast broken. In a short period of time, the speed of the ship was greatly reduced. The other ship was not much better. The white sail had a large hole cut open, and the speed of the ship was quickly reduced. Without any hesitation, Andre shouted at the top of his voice, "All personnel, pay attention. Prepare for boarding battle. Fill the cannons with grape shot. Gunners, get to your positions. Now it's time to test your courage." Although the 800-ton ship was only half the size of the Eye of Arcane, or even 1/3 of its size, the crew would definitely not be less than 200 to 300. Moreover, there might even be feudal knights or professionals of level 5 and above. They had to be cautious. It should be known that hand-to-hand combat at sea was often more brutal than a confrontation between two armies on land. As both sides had no way of retreat, there was no possibility of escape at all. The only way to win a chance of survival was to fight to the death. Chapter 372. Realizing that they might not be able to escape, the enemy ship quickly began to retaliate. The ballista installed on the deck hurled stone balls into the air, drawing a beautiful parabola before crashing onto the deck with a bang. A section of the guardrail was instantly smashed to smithereens. Splinters of wood splattered on the arms and faces of the crew nearby, but fortunately, there were no casualties. Seeing that the enemy was still resisting with all their might, Bartholomew raised his weapon with a sinister smile and roared, "Gunners, get ready! Fire! All gunners, fire! Fire! Kill these sons of cheese! Little bastards from Bakarov's city! I'll treat you to some grapes! Ha ha! Go to hell!" Following the chaotic curses of the gunners, the cannon doors on the right side of the ship were opened one after another. The pitch-black muzzles were adjusted and aimed at the deck of the enemy's flagship, while the fuses were quickly lit. Boom, 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 boom. 30 24-pound bronze cannons were like terrifying demons from the abyss, letting out a deafening roar. Thousands of great bullets fell from the sky, plowing the enemy ship from top to bottom in an instant. Be it the sailors, ballistas, sails, or anything else, everything was smashed to smithereens. Screams and wails could be heard incessantly. Fortunately, the great bullets did not have a strong penetrating power and did not cause much damage to the main mast and hull. If they had fired solid bullets, the ship would have already begun to sink. Seeing that more than half of the combatants on the enemy's deck had died, Bartholomew immediately shouted excitedly, "Get close! Get close!" Under his command, the old sailor in charge of the helm laughed heartily and swung the rudder to the right. A few seconds later, the two ships collided with a loud bang. Due to the difference in tonnage, the eye of the Arcane did not suffer much damage, but the enemy ship was almost overturned. Some of the unlucky ones managed to escape the great bullets, but were thrown into the sea by the collision. As soon as the ship came to a stop, André quickly drew his curved sword and ordered loudly, "Musketeers, fire!" Under his command, the musketeers quickly lined up in 3 rows, aimed at the remaining enemies below, and pulled the trigger. For a moment, the sound of gunfire was endless. After half a minute, there was no one left standing on the deck of the enemy ship. Basically, if they were not shot open by grape shot, they were hit by musket bullets. Even if they were still breathing, they were not far from death. After all, lead was poisonous. Once it entered the body, it would quickly spread throughout the body along with the blood. If it could not be removed in a short period of time, death would be inevitable even with divine treatment. Ha 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 ha, that was right. That's it. How satisfying. This is a F*King naval battle. Guys, boarding the ship. Catch everyone hiding in the cabin. Kill anyone who dares to resist. Bartholomew shouted as he grabbed the rope and swung it through the air like a swing. He landed steadily on the deck, covered in blood. His movements were as skillful as those of a pirate from the Sardinia. The 150 barbarian warriors who were ready to go did not show any weakness. They boarded the enemy ship and began to search the cabin. In a short while, they found the people hiding inside one by one. There were cooks in charge of cooking, as well as cowardly sailors. There were about 30 people in total. They were all scared out of their wits, trembling nonstop. Their eyes were filled with fear and despair. Just as André thought that the battle was over, the sound of an intense battle suddenly came from the cabin. In less than 2 seconds, the deck at the stern of the ship exploded, and a man in full armor flew out. He held a broadsword in one hand and a kite shield with the image of a griffin on the other. His eyes were filled with determination, and he did not show any signs of panic despite being surrounded by so many people. Even though his face could not be seen clearly due to the helmet, it was certain that he was no more than 25 years old. A second later, Eunice jumped out of the large hole, waving the whip in her hand as she teased, "Wow, a probationary knight of the Griffin Knights from Bacaro City. What a pleasant surprise. The young knight was very calm. He only shot a cold glance at her before standing up and saying, "Umph, so you're from Linton City. No wonder you're chasing us so relentlessly. I'm a knight and a noble. Sir David Herbert Lawrence is a noble, and so is the lady in the captain's cabin. We can surrender and pay the ransom, but you have to ensure that we're treated well. Otherwise, I'd rather die in battle than surrender." After the short exchange, he was very clear that he was no match for this half-demon in front of him, especially the long sword that flickered with dark red light in her hand. It was definitely not something that ordinary armor could block. Moreover, his mission was to protect someone on the ship from harm, so surrendering after negotiating the terms was the wisest choice. However, it was a pity that he had overestimated his own strength and underestimated Eunice's disgust for the privileged. He also did not make the correct judgment of the situation. Rather die in battle than surrender? The corners of Eunice's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a cold smile that made people shudder. Following that, she exerted strength in her legs and rushed forward like an arrow leaving the bow. She raised her sword and directly pierced half an inch into the steel armor. The 3 layers of armor did not pose much of a hindrance. The moment the two passed by each other, she whispered softly in his ear, "Idiot! Since you're not willing to surrender obediently, then die." What? The young knight who was attacked obviously didn't expect such a situation to happen. His handsome face suddenly changed color, and he quickly turned 180 degrees with his right foot as the center to avoid being pierced by the sword. Just as he was about to counterattack with his weapon and shield, he suddenly felt his legs go soft, and he almost fell to the deck. It was as if his strength and life force were constantly draining away. Even his footsteps became light, as if he was powerless due to excessive blood loss. Without a doubt, this pitiful and unlucky guy had a lot of blood absorbed by the sword of the king's blood. Although his strong physique as a knight did not cause him to immediately die or fall into a coma, his reaction became slower by half a beat. After the successful attack, Eunice used her tongue to greedily lick the blood on the tip of the sword. The evil red light in her eyes increased, and she asked with a playful expression, "How do you feel, my dear apprentice knight? Do you feel a little powerless? Don't worry, this is only the beginning. In the next few minutes, I will slowly suck away every bit of strength and life force in your body. Have a good taste of this hell of pain and despair." Chapter 373. You damned demon. How dare you disobey the rules set by the Alliance? I'm going to complain to the highest council. Just wait to be punished by the Supreme Court. The young knight roared angrily at everyone on the deck. His expression was as if he had been deceived and betrayed. He could not believe that his reasonable request had been rejected. Ha ha ha! You're really naive and cute. Complain to the highest council? Come on, that'll have to wait until you survive the battle. I haven't thought about whether to silence you. After saying that, Eunice swung the long whip in her hand and instantly wrapped it around her opponent's ankle. She pulled with force, and the unprepared knight was immediately driven by the huge force. He lost his balance and fell to the ground with a plop. His helmet rolled to the side, revealing a very young and handsome face with short golden hair. However, after rolling on the deck, his whole body was covered with sticky blood. He looked very miserable. Eunice did not give the enemy any time to breathe. The moment he fell, she directly pulled out a handgun, aimed at his left shoulder, and pulled the trigger. As an alien who had struggled at the bottom of society for more than 10 years, she was not as picky as other warriors when it came to weapons. She was willing to try anything that could help her kill her opponent. After seeing the power of a handgun, she took the initiative to ask Andre for 2. Today, they finally came in handy. Bang! With a roar, the lead bullet, propelled by gunpowder, shot out at a speed that was difficult to be seen by the naked eye. It covered a distance of less than 10 meters in an instant. If it were an ordinary person, they would have fallen to the ground without even having the chance to react. However, the young knight was not an ordinary person. As a melee professional above level 5, he had extraordinary reflexes. The moment the lead bullet was about to hit his armor, he suddenly moved his shield upward by more than 10 centimeters. Then, the two collided, and a dazzling white light burst out. One could vaguely see that a layer of invisible force field appeared on the surface of the shield, preventing the lead bullet from hitting the surface. It played a very good buffering role. Seeing this scene, Andre's face showed a surprised expression. He muttered to himself, "Oh, that shield is actually a magical equipment. Moreover, the enchantment level is not low." It seems that the identity of this trainee knight is not simple. Ever since the 3 great magic recessions, the number of mages had plummeted to less than 10% of their peak, and their levels were generally not high. In addition, a large number of techniques and recipes had been lost, which directly led to the production of all kinds of magic-related items. Therefore, the price could be said to be rising steadily, especially this kind of permanently enchanted equipment, which was pitifully low in production. The Linton City Mage Association only produced 5 to 10 weapons a month, and most of them were produced by the members themselves. The number of weapons sold to the public was no more than 30 in a year. Even if it was just a weapon with the sharpness attribute, it could easily be sold for more than 5,000 gold coins. Obviously, an ordinary novice knight would not be able to afford such expensive equipment, even if he sold his entire family fortune. The only possibility was that it was a treasure from his family or a gift from the person he was loyal to. No matter which one it was, it meant that the user had a corresponding identity or value. Just as Andre was silently observing what was so special about the young knight, the battle on the deck of the ship had reached its climax. Due to the physical attributes of both parties far surpassing that of ordinary people, there were often some difficult attacks and defensive movements that attracted the attention of the surrounding sailors and barbarian warriors. In Oraire, a duel between high-level professionals was sacred and inviolable. Unless one of them was already defeated, if anyone rushed to help, it would be equivalent to an insult to the target. Not only would they not be grateful, but it was also very likely that they would become enemies. Therefore, although there were many onlookers, none of them joined the ranks of the besiegers. Of course, even if they joined in, it would be difficult to do much. The biggest possibility was that they would be killed by the trainee knight and then take advantage of the chaos to escape. According to Andre's calculations, the strength of an ordinary adult male was around 10. Those who had been working hard for a long time were slightly stronger and were around 12 to 13. A knight's strength was at least 16 to 18. There were even some geniuses who could exceed the limits of humans and reach 19 to 20. Don't think that the difference of 1 or 2 points was not big. In fact, the higher the basic attribute value, the more significant the change would be. Take strength, for example. For every increase of 3 points, the strength would double. What did 4 times the strength of an adult male mean? This meant that a single punch could shatter all the ribs, causing the entire chest to cave in, and a single slash could cut a person in half. Against ordinary sailors, this was an overwhelming advantage. Otherwise, knights would not have been able to become the cornerstone of the feudal rule of this land. But unfortunately, this young novice knight was a little unlucky today. He had encountered a demonkin warrior who was stronger than him, had a better physique, had faster reaction speed, and even had spell-like abilities, Eunice. From a certain point of view, the Teflon, who had mixed demon and human bloodlines, could be considered an independent species. They fully demonstrated the advantages of being mixed bloods. They weren't like pure demons who often fell into uncontrollable madness, nor are they as weak as humans. As long as a Teflon could control their own hearts, it was almost certain that they would become strong. After a month and a half of baptism in the Mage Association's underground training ground, Eunice could already control her bloodthirsty, manic capricious, and endless desires very well. Moreover, she could even turn a part of her negative emotions into battle fanaticism, giving her enemies great pressure. One could see her brandishing a long sword in one hand and a long whip in the other. Sometimes she would attack the limbs, sometimes she would attack the neck. Once the whip coiled around, the enemy would immediately suffer a great loss. In addition, The tail was also a very troublesome attack point, because the bone at the end of the tail was equipped with a sharp metal sheath. If one was not careful in battle, they would be cut. In just a few minutes, the armor on the young knight's body became tattered, and his handsome face had a few shallow cuts. If it was not for the fact that Eunice had no intention of killing, he might have already died countless times. After observing for so long, Andre had a rough judgment in his heart. He immediately waved his hand and shouted, "Enough! Let's stop here. I agree to give you the treatment of a noble, and I'm also willing to give that young lady the treatment of a noble. But David Herbert Lawrence can't. He has some personal grievances with my vice captain that must be settled." Chapter 374. After receiving the order, Eunice dodged in an instant and used her whip to tighten around the young knight's neck. Following that, she kicked his heel forcefully and directly knocked her opponent to the ground. She looked down at him condescendingly and sneered with disdain. "Humph. Consider yourself lucky. If not for my master's orders, I would have let you have a taste of what it's like to live a life worse than death." The young knight did not refute, only struggling to get up from the deck. He wiped the blood off his face and suppressed the anger and humiliation in his heart, bowing slightly to Andre. "Thank you very much for your kindness. My name is Clive Crom, a probationary knight of the Griffin Knights of Bacaro City. From now on, I am your captive." It was obvious that he had received a good education. Even in such a difficult situation, he was unwilling to be impolite. This was obviously the style of a great noble. As the saying goes, speak the human language, speak the human language. Andre also assumed the style of a noble, bowing with one hand on his chest. "I'm sorry, my servant was a little irritable just now. She has been treated unfairly in the past, so she is full of prejudice against the privileged class. I hope you don't mind. Also, my name is Andre, Baron of Linton City, and also the captain of the Eye of Arcane." "It's all right, I understand. However, I hope that such a situation will not happen to Miss Rowling. Her identity is very special. If something unpleasant happens, it won't be as simple as an all-out war between Bacaro City and Linton City." After saying that, the young knight, who called himself Clive Crom, had a meaningful expression on his face. His tone seemed to be both a kind reminder and a warning, making it difficult to grasp. Just as Andre was about to ask about Miss Rowling's identity, a burst of laughter suddenly came from the entrance to the lower level of the ship. Soon, Bartholomew escorted out an old man who was about the same age as himself and had almost all his hair falling out. From the ecstasy in his eyes, it wasn't hard to deduce that this person was David Herbert Lawrence. Behind them, a few barbarian warriors were watching over two young maids, as well as a noble lady who was about 20 years old, with long silver hair and a white dress. Without a doubt, this was the Miss Rowling that Clive had mentioned. She attracted everyone's attention as soon as she appeared, because her ears were a little different from ordinary humans. They were slightly pointed. Even if she wasn't a half-elf, she had a very rich elven bloodline. "Ha ha ha. Don't dawdle. Go, old bastard. You probably didn't think that there would be a day you would fall into my hands." As soon as Bartholomew arrived on the deck, he gave his former enemy a vicious kick. His heart was filled with the thrill of revenge, and his words were incessantly provoking Bartholomew in an attempt to exact revenge for all the humiliation he had suffered in the past. David Herbert Lawrence clearly knew his current situation and obediently allowed Bartholomew to beat and scold him without any intention of resisting. He knew very well how much he had gone overboard in the past, so no matter how much he begged, it was useless. He might as well pretend to be a coward and do whatever he wanted. At most, he would be humiliated and tortured, and the ransom would be increased by several times. His life would still be guaranteed. As for Miss Rowling and her maids, they were slightly better off. Even though their eyes revealed boundless fear, they hadn't suffered any injuries and weren't harassed by the sailors. After all, regardless of whether they were barbarian warriors, they disdained to casually bully the weak, especially a few weak women. Seeing the girl with long silver hair appear, Clive Crom immediately rushed over and asked with concern, "Miss Rowling, are you all right?" Are you hurt? The girl with elven blood covered her nose and mouth with a handkerchief, shaking her head with an unsightly expression. No, no, but the smell of blood here makes me dizzy and nauseous. Can we quickly leave this place? In fact, she wasn't the only one who had a very serious adverse reaction. The other two young maids also couldn't help but tremble, clearly frightened by the slaughterhouse-like environment on the deck. Of course, I've already discussed the terms of surrender. The other party has promised to guarantee the safety of the two of us and give us the corresponding treatment of nobles. So please don't worry too much. I'll immediately write a letter and have the family send the ransom. It won't be long before you regain your freedom. Clive Crumb forced out a smile and comforted her softly. However, his current appearance clearly wasn't persuasive, especially the armor that was riddled with holes. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell what had happened just now. Rolling picked up her handkerchief and gently wiped the wounds on the novice knight's face, a trace of apology in her eyes. I'm really sorry. You actually suffered such serious injuries in order to protect me. If I still had. Before she could finish, Clive Crumb hurriedly interrupted her. He blinked his eyes a few times, then straightened his chest and deliberately shouted, "It doesn't matter. My injuries are all superficial. Even if I don't need treatment, it will scab over in at most 2 days and heal in 3 to 5 days. It's my honor to be able to stand up for such a beautiful lady like you." Oh yes, I think I must have been frightened. I was a little incoherent just now. Please don't mind. Now, let's hurry up and leave. The strong smell of blood here always reminds me of the terrible hell and abyss. After saying that, Rolling left the merchant ship and came to the deck of the Eye of Arcane with the help of the young knight. Andre narrowed his eyes and looked up and down at this strange combination. The corners of his mouth rose slightly, revealing a playful smile. Then he took the initiative to greet them. He took the silver-haired girl's slender white hand and kissed it on the back of her hand. At the same time, he greeted her, "Nice to meet you, beautiful lady. I'm afraid I'll have to wrong you to be a captive for a while. But please don't worry too much. I promise that apart from a slight restriction on your freedom, I won't let you suffer any grievances in other aspects." Rolling was obviously not used to having intimate contact with the opposite sex. After the hand-kissing ceremony, she quickly withdrew her hand and slightly stiffly bowed. "Thank you. You're really an elegant gentleman. If you don't mind, can I make a request that might be a little excessive?" Chapter 375. Oh, please speak. As long as it is within my power, I will not decline. Andre pretended to be forthright as he promised. "I want to plead for mercy on behalf of those poor sailors on the other ships. Please don't use those terrifying alchemy weapons that can make loud noises. Give them a way out." Rolling spoke her thoughts without thinking. Perhaps it was the influence of the elves' love for life, or perhaps it was her kindness. In short, this silver-haired girl hoped that the crew of the other 4 merchant ships wouldn't be slaughtered by great bullets and muskets like the flagship. Andre thought for a bit, then pointed to David Herbert Lawrence, who had just been brought to the deck of the Eye of Arcane, and said, "In principle, I can agree to your request, but the specific situation will depend on whether this Mr. Captain is willing to cooperate or not, and whether those sailors will obediently surrender. If they stubbornly resist, then I can only say sorry." In fact, he didn't like killing. The reason why he used the cannons was because he had no other choice. It must be known that naval battles were different from land battles. There were very few times when one would take the initiative to surrender, especially hand-to-hand combat. It could be said to be extremely dangerous. There was no formation, no tactics. It was a chaotic battle where everyone gathered together. The slightest bit of carelessness would lead to death under the chaotic blades. There was a good saying, being merciful to the enemy was being cruel to oneself. He had only chosen to minimize his own casualties. Hearing someone finally mention him, David hurriedly struggled to stand up and shouted with a sinister expression, "I can cooperate with your actions, but you have to agree to one condition. Otherwise, I would rather have all the sailors fight to the death than issue the order to surrender." "Fight to the death?" Andre stared at the stubborn old man before him. and a trace of a contemptuous smile instantly appeared on his face. He reached out his hand and patted his wrinkled, old face. "Idiot! I think you still haven't figured out the situation. The sailors on the remaining ships aren't my subordinates. What does their life or death have to do with me? As long as I want to, I can send all the ships to the bottom of the sea from hundreds of meters away at any time. Similarly, I can also kill everyone standing on the deck within a few minutes. Tell me, what gave you the courage to talk terms with me? Or is it that your old brain has lost its ability to think and is now talking nonsense?" Dumbfounded, David Herbert Lawrence didn't expect that he would be humiliated in front of so many people. He didn't expect Andre to reject him so straightforwardly, leaving no room for negotiation. He originally thought that as a young man, it was the period when his hormones were the most vigorous, so he shouldn't reject the request of a young and beautiful woman. He could also take the opportunity to make a request and get rid of the awkward situation and avoid falling into the hands of his enemy. Unfortunately, Andre had always been unmoved by force or persuasion, especially by this kind of scheming old fox. After teaching her a harsh lesson, he turned around and shrugged helplessly. "I'm sorry, Miss Rowling. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you. Mr. David Herbert Lawrence would not cooperate with me, and the end of it was only by slaughter and conquest. Please rest in the cabin for a while. I promise it will be done soon." "All right, that's such a pity." Rowling sighed dejectedly and turned to walk into the dimly lit cabin. Clive Crumb immediately wanted to follow, but was stopped by Andre's outstretched hand. He pointed to the weapon and shield in the hands of the trainee knight and said, "Leave these 2 pieces of equipment. You are now a captive and can't carry any threatening items. Moreover, they're now one of my spoils of war. I can give you the weapon, but this shield doesn't belong to me. It's the property of the knights." Clive hugged the shield tightly to his chest, as if afraid that someone would suddenly snatch it away. "I don't care whose property it is, it belongs to me now. Hand it over immediately, or I don't mind letting Eunice teach you a lesson. In addition, seeing that you've cooperated, I can allow you to pay a ransom to redeem this magic shield." Andre extended his hand and waited for Clive to offer the shield with both hands. Ever since he discovered the enchantment level of this thing, he had always wanted to get his hands on it and study it to see if he could replicate it. How could anyone refuse? Hearing that there was still a chance to redeem the shield, the trainee knight's face looked a little better. Finally, he reluctantly put the shield in Andre's hands and quickly ran into the cabin to chase after Rowling. Feeling the magical fluctuation from the shield, Andre nodded in satisfaction and shouted directly to Bartholomew, "Arrange for a few people to stay behind and count the goods. The rest of you come back. Hurry up, we still have 4 ships to clean up. Also, hang that old man upside down on top of the mast for me. Let everyone know the consequences of trying to bargain with me." "Yes, sir. My dearest Sir Captain." Bartholomew took off his hat, bowed deeply, and immediately began to command the crew to return to the Eye of Arcane. In just a few minutes, except for a few people who were still counting the goods in the cabin, the rest had all returned to the deck. Immediately after, the huge warship set sail again and headed for the next target. Due to the destructive damage to the sails, the other 4 ships didn't manage to run far before they were caught up one by one. Under the double attack of great bullets and muskets, the enemy was often beaten to the point that they couldn't fight back. When they boarded the ships, they almost didn't encounter any decent resistance and were easily taken down. Relying on the huge advantage, the Eye of Arcane achieved an overwhelming victory in the first battle. Only less than 15 of the crew members who participated in the battle suffered some serious external injuries. However, under the treatment of the elven druid Nina, they quickly recovered. The result of the battle was quite brilliant. They captured a total of 5 large ships full of goods. The largest among them had a displacement of 800 tons, and the smallest was 250 tons. In between, there was 1 ship of 600 tons and 2 ships of 450 tons. It could be said that they had a great harvest. Moreover, the hulls of the ships were basically in good condition. After some slight repairs and new sails, they could be put into use. After the resistance of the last ship was completely wiped out, This not-so-fierce naval battle finally came to an end. Just as Bartholomew was busy with counting the goods and estimating the value, a large amount of information began to appear in Andre's vision. Obviously, the long-awaited reward had finally arrived. Chapter 376. Large-Scale Mission, Trade War. You have successfully captured 5 armed merchant ships belonging to the enemy and killed more than 200 of their crew members. None of the commanders, including the captain, escaped. Mission evaluation is perfect. Difficulty level, easy. Congratulations. You have received 1,500 EXP. Congratulations. You have received a low-level magic item, Captain's Eye Patch, enchanted with long-range magic. Wearing it will not only prevent your eye from going blind, but will also allow you to see further and clearer. Congratulations. You have received a weapon enchantment, Fire Damage Blueprint. Recorded on it is the technique to permanently enchant a weapon or armor with the level 2 Arcane spell Fireblade. Your follower, the Elven Druid Nina, has successfully completed a mission. Number of missions required to advance to the next level, 2. As the last line of information was displayed, Andre suddenly received an eye patch made of a special black metal and a small piece of crumpled parchment. It was obvious that this was the mission reward. Ignoring the busy crew members, he first opened the parchment and glanced at it. There was an extremely complicated magic pattern on it. Without a doubt, it was an enchantment, Fire Damage Arcane pattern. As long as it was engraved on a specific weapon or armor with magic materials, it would immediately grant the weapon fire damage. As for the other eye patch, after putting it on, there was a very strange feeling. With just a thought in his mind, the eye patch would instantly show the scene in the distance, just like the focal length of a telescope. As long as it was within the visual range of the naked eye, there would be no problem. Obviously, this was a very useful magic item, especially for ship captains who spend a lot of time at sea, or people who like to use bows, crossbows, catapults, and other long-range weapons. Once they had it, aiming would be a piece of cake. Moreover, in areas with complicated terrain, it could be used to discover the enemy first and shoot a fatal arrow. However, it was a pity that it was not very useful for mages. This was because arcane spells either directly targeted the enemy with a mind or were large-scale attacks. There was no need for aiming. Of course, no matter what, this blindfold was a magic item. It was at least 100 times better than the one Andre was wearing. Therefore, he did not plan to take it off. He carefully put the blueprint into his pouch and decided to study it when he had the time. He wanted to see if there were any differences between the magic runes recorded in the blueprint and the ones recorded in the Mage Association. In reality, there was no need to learn how to permanently buff a weapon, armor, or accessory. Once a mage grasped an arcane spell, they would naturally have the ability to cast it on any object. The only thing they had to take note of was that the medium used to store the spell had to be refined. If there was even the slightest problem with the engraving, they would only end up with a useless item. In addition, the higher the level of magic, the higher the requirement for craftsmanship. Some magic was so complicated that they had to work continuously for a week or even a month. It was because of this that magical weapons, armor, and accessories were always in short supply. Even if the mages worked hard to create them, they would never be able to keep up with the speed at which they were damaged. From a certain point of view, the price of magical items in Orire was currently decreasing. If not for the fact that some of them could be dug out from many ancient ruins, the price would probably be several times higher. Next, let me see what kind of magic is cast on this shield. After keeping the blueprint, Andre muttered to himself as he began to carefully observe the somewhat worn-out, seemingly unremarkable, kook-shaped shield in his hands. He carefully used his finger to trace the uneven surface of the shield. He suddenly realized that the outermost layer of metal was not steel, but a cold alloy to the touch. In order to better deflect the force of arrows, spears, swords, and other sharp weapons, this layer of metal was not directly wrapped like ordinary shields. Instead, it was compressed into a V-shape using a special process. When sharp objects pierced the surface of a shield, they would instantly be obstructed by layers of grooves. If they hit the protrusions, then the force would be directly deflected. If they hit the grooves, then they would slide to the side along with the grooves. It had to be said that the creator of this shield was a true genius. He had taken into account both the resistance and the dissipation of the force. Moreover, this kind of ripple design also helped to increase the friction. As long as it was used properly, it could break those thin weapons like rapiers, swords, daggers, and so on. In addition to the extremely special shape and unknown metal, the second layer of the shield was made of leather and hardwood used for shock absorption. It was basically a layer of leather, a layer of hardwood, another layer of leather, and another layer of hardwood. It was like a sandwich biscuit. Each layer was not thick, but when squeezed together, it immediately became different from the rest. It had to be known that this special structure was extremely similar to a bulletproof vest. First, the outermost layer of metal would block the penetration of sharp blades, and then the sandwich structure behind would act as a buffer. By the time the force was transmitted to the user, most of it would have been consumed, and it could be easily blocked. Andre had never thought that he would be able to see such a scientific design in this primitive and backward world. Moreover, it was used on a shield, and he was instantly interested. Just as he was about to cast an arcane spell to identify the magic cast on the inside of the shield, he suddenly heard an excited shout from behind him. "Sir! No! My dearest Sir Captain! The money and goods of the 5 merchant ships have been accounted for, and the value has far exceeded our expectations. The initial estimate is that it should be around 200 to 400,000 gold coins. Together with the ransom that needs to be paid for the captives and the price of the ships themselves, we have basically robbed 500 to 600,000 gold coins this time, especially the largest merchant ship, which is actually filled with sugar and spices, as well as 10,000 gold coins and 70,000 silver coins in cash." Bartholomew did not know how to describe his feelings at this moment. He could only use a series of numbers to express his uncontrollable excitement. If not for the fact that he had to maintain his dignity as the vice captain, he would probably have directly taken off his pants and peed into the sea without saying a word, thanking the goddess for her blessings. What did 500,000 gold coins mean? Before obtaining the salt trade, Lady Anastasia of West Industries had been at their most prosperous, and the annual profits might have been far from this number. But now, this robbery was worth it, and it was done at 0 cost. It was completely profitable. Chapter 377. The enormous wealth made this old man, who had drifted on the sea for more than 30 years, unable to maintain his calm. He finally knew why the pirates of the Sardinia Islands could always rise from the ashes no matter how many times they were annihilated. There was no other reason. The rewards were just too generous. Even though most merchant ships carried goods worth less than a few tens of thousands, as long as he could snatch a ship carrying valuable goods like this one, he could instantly earn enough to cover his expenses for the rest of his life. Oh, how could there be so much? What's on those 5 freighters? Andre was clearly shocked by the estimated value. He didn't have time to identify the shield and hurriedly asked for the details so that he could have an idea. After all, in the South where trade was relatively developed, there were only a few goods that could be sold for such a price. Although sugar and spices were expensive luxury goods, they alone weren't worth that much. Bartholomew quickly took out a piece of parchment, cleared his throat, and read, "We have seized a total of 50 tons of dark red cane sugar and more than 150 tons of various spices from pepper, cumin, ginger, nutmeg, and so on. We have almost everything you can think of. Apart from that, there were also 300 bolts of silk from the distant east, 500 kilograms of tea leaves and tobacco, 800 breastplates made of fine steel, and countless weapons like swords, daggers, axes, composite bows, crossbows, arrows, and so on. In the largest ship's hold, I also found more than 30 sealed iron cans. If I'm not wrong, the things stored inside should be blazing fire glue. As for the rest, there were a lot of bacon, cheese, flour, salted meat, dried beans, large barrels of wine, ale, honey wine, and so on. All of them were necessary for long-term voyages." After hearing this long list, Andre immediately frowned and asked with widened eyes, "So we robbed a fleet that was transporting military supplies to Bakarov City, excluding the few spices, sugar, silk, tea leaves, and tobacco. The rest are the most sought-after goods in trade wars." "That's right. We robbed a fleet that was transporting military supplies to the enemy." Bartholomew nodded lightly in reply. Actually, this wasn't hard to guess. Considering the current situation and the types of resources, it was easy to analyze the results. First of all, the ships of Linton City had been attacking frequently recently, constantly harassing Bakaro's shipping routes. Many small and medium-sized ships had no choice but to stay in the harbor, not daring to leave. Only a few powerful fleets dared to go out to sea. However, this fleet led by David Herbert Lawrence wasn't very lucky. They were discovered by the Eye of Arcane midway, and the cargo on the ship, along with the ship itself, became the spoils of war for others. It could be said that they were extremely unlucky. Ha ha! In that case, we were really lucky. We actually bumped into a big fat sheep as soon as we left the house. Tell all the sailors that there will be a banquet this evening, and all food and drink will be served. In addition, have someone count the gold and silver coins and distribute them first, so that everyone can be happy. After saying that, Andre took a deep breath. Facing the wind blowing from the picture, a trace of pride and satisfaction appeared on his face. For him, this voyage wasn't just fulfilling the dreams of his previous life, but also a good opportunity to gain political capital and strengthen his own strength. Imagine, when the captured ships were continuously sent back to Linton City, how would the nobles react? How would the ordinary citizens react? By then, with the power of public opinion, Andre would be able to gain a large number of people who supported him from the lower class. Then, he would sell the captured ships and goods to the nobles. It wouldn't take long for him to establish an unbreakable alliance of interests. Like a tree, he would plant his roots deep into the ground and prepare for the upcoming confrontation. As you wish, esteemed captain. I believe that the crew will be very happy to hear this news. You must know that this is definitely a day worth celebrating for them. Not only does it prove that the giant ship you designed and built is invincible, but you've also received a generous reward. Even I feel like I'm dreaming. After saying that, Bartholomew very humbly knelt on one knee and bowed respectfully. His eyes flickered with inexplicable excitement and fanaticism. If at the very beginning, he had no choice but to become this young man's retainer because of Countess Anastasia's order, then now, he was offering his loyalty from the bottom of his heart. In particular, after this naval battle, the Arcane, I had proven that without the participation of spellcasters, it could certainly dominate the entire Southern Sea. As someone who loved the sea and loved adventure, this was a fatal temptation. Just like the saying goes, there is no such thing as love or hatred without reason in this world. Human nature flowed with greed and fickleness. The so-called loyalty was nothing more than a relationship of mutual benefit. If one couldn't give his subordinates enough good treatment and room for development, then betrayal or abandonment would only be a matter of time. Obviously, Bartholomew had now recognized Andre as the person he pledged his loyalty to. This could be seen from a huge change in his attitude. At the same time, he was looking forward to showing his prowess in the upcoming trade war and making his name, along with the mystical eye, into an immortal legend in this part of the sea. Perhaps it was because they were extremely backward, or perhaps it was because of the bard's propaganda, but in short, the people of Orire generally had a strong hero complex. From the old people who were about to enter their coffins to the children who were still playing in their diapers, there wasn't a single one of them who didn't yearn to one day do something earth-shattering and be admired and praised by countless people. Chloe was the most typical example of this. Instead of enjoying the luxurious life of a noble, her mind was filled with arduous and dangerous adventures in the wild. In fact, this kind of phenomenon was very common in noble families. It was just that there were very few people like her who were still obsessed with the melodramatic scenes and stories at the age of 14 or 15. If she wasn't careful, she would be categorized as an outlier. However, Andre quite liked this kind of naive and muddle-headed character of this girl. At least, It was much better than the other noble ladies who had begun to learn to scheme against each other. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but chuckle and shake his head. Where did Chloe go? I don't think I've seen her since the battle just ended. Could she have done something strange again? Chapter 378. She should still be wandering around in the cabin of the captured merchant ship, saying that she's looking for hidden treasures. The corner of Bartholomew's mouth twitched unconsciously at the mention of Chloe. Although he had long heard of this young lady's strange temper, it was only after witnessing her unruly behavior that he was surprised to find that the rumors were not false at all. One must know that a ship was only so big. Apart from the supporting structure, the usable space had been transformed into a warehouse, a resting area for sailors, a utility room, a carpentry room, and so on. How could there be a secret room? Hearing that Chloe was starting to get a little confused again, Andre sighed helplessly. Forget it, let her be. Remember to complete the task I just gave you as soon as possible. Also, send a few men to repair the damaged masts and sails. We'll return early tomorrow morning. Normally speaking, after completing an attack or plunder at sea, a ship would return to a port or a secret base to rest and reorganize. Although the Mystical I had only been out at sea for less than a day, it had already captured a total of 5 merchant ships. They had to transport all of them back before they could continue their attack. It was like a snake that would take the initiative to find a hidden place to slowly digest its prey after swallowing it. Once it was attacked halfway through, it would immediately vomit out the food in its stomach. Similarly, Andre's most important task at present was to tow the merchant ships and goods back to the deserted island, and then hand them over to Countess Anasta of Westia to slowly deal with. This way, he would be able to attack the trade route of Bakarov City without any scruples. Otherwise, just protecting these 5 valuable merchant ships would take him a lot of effort. In the vast sea, the captain's orders were equivalent to law. No matter how ridiculous, or unreasonable it sounded, it had to be carried out meticulously. This was because these seemingly useless actions were likely to be summed up from countless bloody lessons and could often save lives at critical moments. Of course, the knowledge that Andre brought from Earth might not be all that useful in this magical sea. At the very least, there were no giant sea monsters that were easily hundreds of meters in size on Earth, nor were there all kinds of murlocs and intelligent life forms that lived at the bottom of the sea. At his command, all the crew went about their work joyfully. Some were busy mending the masts, changing the ragged sails, and mending the damaged parts of the ship. Others were in charge of bringing food into the galley for the banquet to be held. As the saying goes, enthusiasm determines efficiency. The crew members, who had just received a large sum of money, broke out with unprecedented enthusiasm. The speed of their work was incredible. In less than 2 hours, they finished the work that would normally take them a whole day to finish. After all, 10,000 gold coins and 70,000 silver coins were not a small number. There were only 460 people on the ship. On average, each person could get 20 gold coins and 150 silver coins. Those who performed well in battle could even get double the amount. Perhaps for most nobles, this amount of money might not be enough to eat a sumptuous dinner. But for the impoverished sailors, they would have to work hard for a whole year without eating or drinking to earn it. Many people who received the money were so excited that tears streamed down their faces. They swore to be loyal to the generous and benevolent Captain Andre. Even if they had to sail to the end of the sea, they would never leave him and would always follow him by his side. To sum it up in one sentence, their loyalty soared. It was estimated that it had already exceeded 200%. Coupled with the fact that the naval battle had just ended, the crew members' brains were still in an excited state. They finally finished all their work before the sun was about to set. One by one, they tied several merchant ships to the stern of the Eye of Arcane with ropes, intending to tow it back to the deserted island. Due to the large number of grape-shot bullets and muskets that had terrifying lethality in the previous battle, the sailors on the enemy ships suffered heavy casualties. The survivors of the 5 ships added together didn't exceed 60 people. Those who were seriously injured were mercifully stabbed, and their bodies were thrown into the sea. It couldn't be helped because whether it was the grape-shot bullets shot by the cannons or the bullets shot by the muskets, they were all made of heavy metal lead. After this thing hit the human body, it would often release all of its kinetic energy. The specific manifestation was that the warhead would be severely deformed and even ruptured, causing a horn-shaped cavity in the human tissue. The area of the wound would be 100 times the cross-sectional area of the bullet. Coupled with the damage caused by the enormous pressure on the human blood circulation system, just looking at it was shocking. It would also cause severe lead poisoning. The pain of the injured was simply unimaginable. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been listed as a prohibited weapon in the later international conventions. With the current medical standards of the Olyre continent, it was impossible to remove the shattered lead bullets from their bodies. Apart from using divine spells, there was absolutely no chance of survival. It would be better to stab them in the back and end their suffering once and for all. As for the remaining people, they had long been scared out of their wits by the terrifying power of the firearms. They automatically handed over their weapons and were locked in the lowest cabin of the Arcane, waiting to be dealt with after returning to the island. If the ship's owner was willing to pay the ransom for them, they would soon regain their freedom. If not, there were only two choices waiting for them. They could either be sold as slaves or sold to Andre. The pirates of the Sardinia Islands used this method to continuously suck the blood of all the cities of the Green Sea Alliance. Otherwise, they would have long declined and perished in the encirclement and suppression. After dealing with all the messy problems at hand, Andre, who was the captain for the first day, could finally stop and take a breather. He silently sat on the railing of the deck, admiring the beautiful sunset on the sea. The golden light reflected on his body warmly. From afar, it looked as if his entire person had merged into one with nature. What are you thinking about? Rolling, who had elven blood, had unknowingly walked over from behind. Her eyes were filled with curiosity as she asked in a soft voice. Unlike Nina, who had grown up in the wild, she had perfectly inherited the elven characteristics of being slender, elegant, beautiful, and loved life. Her every word and action was in line with etiquette, making it impossible for anyone to feel a trace of disgust towards her. Nothing much. I'm just relaxing and thinking about the congratulatory speech for the banquet later. Andre turned around and replied with a faint smile. As a smart person, he had felt from the beginning that the other party's identity was not simple. On one hand, the woman's temperament was too outstanding. On the other hand, she actually had an apprentice knight of the Griffin Knights as her guard. Chapter 379. The Griffin Knights, as the name implied, were knights who rode griffins in the sky. They were the most elite force in Bacarlo City, and there were no more than 50 of them in total. Among them, only 20 or so were qualified to ride griffins. The rest were apprentice knights, the so-called reserves. But this didn't mean that apprentice knights weren't powerful. On the contrary, their fighting strength wasn't too far off from that of an official knight. The root of the problem was that there were too few mature griffins. Only when a certain knight retired, was injured, or died, or a certain young griffin matured would an apprentice knight become an official knight. From a certain perspective, the status of the Griffin Knights was equivalent to that of Lincoln City's Mage Association. Every member was equipped with at least one magical weapon, and they would even be equipped with a small number of anti-magic arrows when war broke out. The mages who used them to kill the enemy were definitely the best of the best. Even though Clive Crom had been defeated in the battle with Eunice, that didn't mean he was weak. On the contrary, if they hadn't been on the ship, and if Eunice hadn't attacked first with the king's blood sword, and if the Demonkin warrior's various magic abilities were excluded, it would have been hard to say who would have won. Andre could see at a glance that Clive Crom wasn't used to the constantly rocking environment of the ship, while Eunice had obviously drifted on the sea for a long time. She was like a fish in water in such a situation. There was no fairness to speak of since the beginning of the battle, so it was completely within reason that Clive Crom had lost. One didn't have to use their brains to figure out that someone who could make the Griffin Knights dispatch an apprentice knight as her guard was naturally no ordinary noble lady. Add to that the fact that the other party had been avoiding the topic of her identity and background. Andre could conclude that this Miss Rowling was likely the daughter of a major noble from another city, or even a princess. In order to prove his conjecture from the moment they met, including taking the initiative to kiss the back of the other party's hand, all of his actions were probing. His goal was to find out the habits that were inadvertently revealed from the minute details. According to psychology, from birth to death, every person would develop a unique personality and habits according to a series of circumstances, such as their living environment, education, family harmony, wealth, and so on. It was like fingerprints, DNA, and the like. It would accompany a person throughout their life. Unless they had undergone long-term and strict special training, they would give themselves away no matter how much they try to hide it. Obviously, Andre, who was good at observation and meticulous, had seen too many things from the lady in front of him. However, he hadn't considered the stakes yet, so he didn't further investigate her real identity to avoid unnecessary trouble. Rowling didn't know about this. Her two dark green eyes were still wide open as she asked in surprise, "Banquet? Is there going to be a banquet on board?" No wonder I could smell the aroma of food. That's right. Our harvest today is very bountiful, so we plan to have a simple celebration. If you're interested, you and Clive can also participate. However, I have to remind you that it's best not to have too many expectations for the food and drinks. Although the chefs on board are not bad, they may use very few ingredients, especially the lack of fresh vegetables and fruits. They can't make any decent dishes, and most of the drinks are inferior ale and wine with poor taste. The taste definitely won't be good. Andre stood up and stretched as he spoke. His flame-like hair fluttered in the wind, giving people a feeling of freedom. He was like a seabird in the sky, exuding an aura of freedom from the inside out. Perhaps it was because he lived in a metropolis full of reinforced concrete buildings in his previous life. He was always on the move for a living and rarely had the time to stop and savor the little things of life. Therefore, he especially enjoyed the tranquility brought to him by the sea. It was as if all his troubles had been completely blown away by the sea breeze. Damn it, your harvest is built on the foundation of plundering innocent merchants. Don't you feel any shame? And in the battle just now, more than half of the sailors died to those powerful alchemy weapons. I can even hear their wrong souls crying. The trainee knight behind Rowling, Clive Crom, finally couldn't hold back the anger in his heart and took the initiative to stand up and criticize. As a noble of Bacaro City, he was born with an extreme hatred for Linton City. Coupled with the knight education he received from a young age, he simply detested plundering on the sea. In his agitation, he even forgot that he was a captive. Looking at the other party's expression full of righteousness, Andre suddenly laughed out loud without warning. He laughed so happily that even tears flowed out. Ha 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 ha! Shame? Innocent merchants? Wrong souls? Crying? I have to say, you're really naive to the point of being cute. You can actually ask such a stupid question. First of all, Mr. David Herbert Lawrence is not an innocent merchant. Not only is he purchasing and transporting military supplies for Bacaro City, but he also frequently plundered merchants weaker than himself, like a pirate. My vice captain can attest to this point. He was once robbed by David and received severe humiliation and abuse when he was a captive. Otherwise, do you think I would hang an old man on the mast for no reason? Second of all, I don't feel the slightest shame about plundering merchant ships. On the contrary, I take pride in it. Linton City and Bacaro City are currently engaged in a trade war. Every time I plunder a merchant ship, it's tantamount to weakening the enemy's strength and increasing our chances of victory. Perhaps in the eyes of Bacaro City citizens, I'm a complete scoundrel, but in the eyes of Linton City citizens, I'm a hero who can bring them victory. May I ask why I feel ashamed? Finally, and third of all, it wasn't my intention to kill those sailors. They only have themselves to blame. After all, I gave them a chance to surrender before the attack, but they responded to my kindness with swords and bows. Since some people want to be brave, they must be prepared to give up their lives. How could such a person be called a vengeful spirit? What's the point of crying? I don't know what you've heard, seen, or interacted with before, but one thing is certain, and that is that you have no understanding of the cruel nature of this world. Chapter 380. Andre's words left Clive speechless. He opened his mouth several times to refute, but he didn't know what to say. His conflicted look was a little funny. The two of them weren't on the same level in terms of logical thinking ability, breadth of knowledge, amount of knowledge, life experience, language organization, grasp of human nature, and so on. Rowling could clearly see this. She hurriedly tugged at the young knight, blinked her eyes, and pretended to be naive as she said, "Perhaps what you said just now is very reasonable, but killing is ultimately not a good thing. Can't people get along with each other peacefully? Must we fight to the death? Sorry, Mississippi. Although it sounds a little cruel, in fact, humans are a race full of destructive tendencies. We are greedy, stupid, and don't have a long-term vision. Endless desires flow in our nature, and we never know what satisfaction is. Perhaps we can temporarily unite when there's a strong external pressure, but once this pressure is gone, we will immediately kill each other." After saying that, Andre shrugged his shoulders, and a trace of sarcasm and ridicule appeared on his face. How terrifying. It's just like a mixture of demons and devils. If this is the nature of humans, then how did the entire civilization exist and develop? Rowling shivered subconsciously and continued to ask questions. She seemed to be very interested in this topic. Andre suddenly realized that in the conversation just now, she didn't seem to think of herself as a human at all. Instead, she identified more with the other half of her elf bloodline. It had to be said that this was a very strange phenomenon. Generally speaking, half-elves, or people with a part of their elf bloodline, would be more conflicted when it came to the issue of race. On one hand, they had a long lifespan and longed to integrate into the elves. On the other hand, they had no choice but to succumb to the human nature of pursuing power, wealth, and honor. There was no doubt that Rowling had absolutely no concerns in this regard. From the beginning to the end, she only showed the nature of an elf, as if the human bloodline didn't bring her any trouble at all. She was even more elegant than most pure-blooded wild elves. With a head full of questions, Andre slightly frowned and replied, "It's very simple. It's the ruling class, which can also be said to be the nobles. In order to protect their rights from being harmed, they formulated a series of laws. If anyone dares to violate them, they will immediately be severely punished and even lose their lives. It's all kinds of cruel criminal laws that to a certain extent intimidated human nature. At the same time, the Church of God established a set of moral standards, causing the social structure to form a stable triangle composed of law, morality, and faith. If any of these points were to disappear, then all kinds of problems would immediately appear. I believe you should have heard that there are many chaotic, lawless areas on the main road, and the root of which is the collapse of these 3 points. Similarly, as long as the balance of the 3 points, then the entire society will continue to develop in a healthy direction. Clap, 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 clap. As soon as he finished speaking, Rowling immediately clapped her hands, and while clapping, she couldn't help but exclaim, "Wonderful! I've never heard a more thorough analysis than this. It's as if you've seen through the power structure of human society. The law represents the ruling class, faith represents the divine right, and morality represents the dividing line between good and evil. The higher areas mean that the relationship between people is friendly, while the lower areas are the exact opposite. There's no trust between people, and they'll even hurt each other over small matters." Thank you. This is just a superficial understanding. Your comprehension ability really surprised me. After all, ordinary noble girls don't have the ability to understand these things that involve society, philosophy, and humanities. Don't you think so? As he spoke, Andre lifted his head, and his 2 sharp eyes instantly became incomparably sharp, as if he wanted to see through her completely from the inside out. Hee, your intelligence is truly terrifying. You can actually discover my flaws with a few words, and your intuition is also very accurate. Coupled with your extremely sharp insight, you don't seem like a youth who's still in puberty at all. Even in my hometown, there's almost no one of your age who can compare to you. After her disguise was exposed, Rowling didn't panic at all. Instead, she turned her head and praised Andre, at the same time raising her hand to signal the nervous Clive Crumb to calm down. Seeing this scene, the corners of Andre's mouth curled up slightly, and he asked with a playful expression, "Thank you again for your praise. If you don't mind, can you tell me your true identity?" "I'm sorry, I can't tell you now, but I can assure you that it has absolutely nothing to do with the trade war between your two cities. If you're interested, I'll send you an invitation in a few months, and you'll know the purpose of my trip then." With that, Rowling stretched out a finger and lightly tapped Andre's forehead. Then, she revealed a meaningful smile, turned around, and walked into the passage, disappearing into the dim cabin. She was like a huge mystery, constantly emitting a unique charm that made people want to explore what was hidden behind that mysterious veil. Andre even felt that this female captive was likely to be a huge problem. If not handled well, it would definitely lead to very serious consequences. He had to treat her carefully and, if possible, it was best to get rid of her as soon as possible so that she wouldn't be accidentally involved in some dangerous matter. Perhaps, as the saying went, humans were an extremely complicated race. On one hand, they had a terrifying curiosity, hoping to unravel all the secrets in the world, but were unwilling to take on the dangerous situations that might occur in the process of exploring. Moreover, the smarter a person was, the more serious such situations would be. This was also the reason why most geniuses needed faith more than ordinary people. It was clear that Andre now had a similar problem. It was as if his brain had been split in the middle and split into two personalities. One of them kept bewitching him to continue digging deeper into Rowling's background, while the other kept warning him to stay away from this potential threat. It was best to stay as far away as possible to prevent new problems from arising before dealing with the current powerful enemy. After all, the real-life game created by the legendary Lich was already a little too much for him to handle. If another one were to appear, he might as well just commit suicide. Chapter 381. After much consideration, Andre decided to feign ignorance and treat this woman with a special identity as an ordinary captive. He would neither pay too much attention to her nor alienate her too much. The ransom would be according to the standard of a normal countess. He would release her as soon as he got the money. As for the invitation mentioned by the other party, he would ignore it for now. After all, he still had a few months of buffer time. If it was a good thing, he would join the fun. If it was a big trouble, he would just find an excuse to reject it. With the end of this probing conversation, both parties tacitly agreed not to mention the matter just now. After the banquet began, everyone continued to eat, drink, and chat. Although the large amount of pickled food was not to their liking, they still forced themselves to eat some salted eggs and fresh fish that had just been fished from the sea. After that, they had a simple chat with Chloe, Bartholomew, and the others before returning to the cabin to rest. For Rowling, who particularly identified with the elven lineage, the banquet on the deck was too simple. The food and drinks were also quite bad, especially the drunken look of the sailors after drinking a lot. They could be described as rude. The only highlight was the harp played by Chloe. As a bard who was about to become a full-time bard, the noble girl could already use most of the musical instruments and sing dozens of heroic stories from ancient times to the present. She instantly became the focus of the banquet. Whether it was the barbarian warriors with serious heroic plots or the homeless sailors wandering the sea all year round, they all became her loyal listeners. Whenever the story reached the climax, under the influence of alcohol, many hot-blooded fellows patted their chests and cursed loudly. Some even beat up their companions beside them. For a moment, there were those who drank, fought, watched, listened to the stories, and stuffed food into their mouths. All in all, The Eye of Arcane had completely turned into a messy playground. Everyone was using their own methods to express the excitement and joy in their hearts. At a glance, it looked extraordinarily lively, especially when oil lamps were lit on the surface of the sea that reflected the silver moonlight. The scene was so beautiful that it was unbelievable. Unlike most of the noble ladies, Chloe did not mind the rudeness of the crew at all, nor did she mind the crude food and cheap drinks provided in the banquet. Instead, she enjoyed the simplicity and happiness of the lower class. It was as if she had entered a state of excitement, constantly putting in her best performance. In the end, she even walked into the middle of the crowd and led the clapping dance, directly pushing the atmosphere of the banquet to the peak. Standing on the stern, Andre looked at the lively crowd below and shook his head with a smile. These guys are really energetic. They've been busy for so long during the day, but they're still so energetic now. It'll take at least 2 or 3 hours to finish. Haha, my dear Sir Captain, leave the lads to their own devices, and when they are tired they will naturally retire to their rest. Don't worry about safety. I've already arranged for lookouts and patrols in advance. As long as there's any danger, everyone will be woken up immediately. Having said that, Bartholomew raised his cup and gulped down a large cup of ale in one breath. He then wiped the wine stains on his beard and turned a blind eye to the few troublemakers who were fighting below. After being a captain for so many years, he knew how to subdue those unruly troublemakers. One of the most effective ways was to find a way to let these guys release the suppressed emotions in their hearts, and fighting was the best choice. Of course, normally speaking, fighting on a ship, regardless of right or wrong, would result in at least 5 lashes or being hung on the mast for more than 3 hours. But now was the time for the banquet, so, as long as it was not too out of line, Bartholomew would usually choose to turn a blind eye to it. When they had enough and exhausted all their energy, they would quickly stop and shake hands to make peace. After listening to the old captain's words, Andre shrugged helplessly. Well, I respect the opinions of the professionals and let everyone have their fun. But there's one thing to remember. No matter what time they sleep tonight, they must set sail tomorrow after the sun rises. I want to rush back to the island before nightfall. To be honest, he was quite disapproving of this kind of extensive management, but he could not come up with any good ideas. After all, sailors had always been known for being free, undisciplined, and uncontrollable. Moreover, they were trapped on a ship all day long. Not only was their diet terrible, but they were also under tremendous mental pressure. Once a string snapped, it would instantly trigger a riot. One must know that these guys were not docile farmers. If they were hot-headed, regardless of whether you were a noble or a king, they would first chop you to death. At worst, they could just steal a ship and become pirates. After all, the ocean was so vast, and there were countless deserted islands. Not to mention, they could also run to some distant port cities. It was precisely because of this reason that Bartholomew was so nervous when the crew's emotions were unstable. He was afraid that he would accidentally cause a serious riot, and it would be too late to cry. In fact, if time and conditions allowed, Andre would like to personally train a group of disciplined Marines. But now he had neither the time nor the energy, so he would just deal with it first. Obviously, Bartholomew was unaware of Andre's thoughts. He confidently patted his chest and assured, "No problem. I'll wake everyone up at dawn. It won't delay your schedule." Besides, the Eye of Arcane is big enough. It shouldn't be too much of a problem to tow a few merchant ships. Then I'll leave everything here to you. I'm feeling a little tired, so I'll go in and rest first. When Chloe has had enough fun, let her rest in the captain's room. After Andre finished speaking, he gently patted Bartholomew's shoulder and turned to walk towards the poop. Eunice and Nina, who had been following behind him all this time, followed closely behind. It didn't take long for them to disappear without a trace. Watching the 3 of them walk into the dim and narrow staircase, Bartholomew smacked his lips and raised his head to stare at his enemy, hanging at the top of the mast. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and a sinister smile appeared on his face. He muttered to himself, "Dear David Herbert Lawrence, how should I deal with you tonight? 10 minutes later, Andre, who was staying in the captain's room and concentrating on studying the magic shield, suddenly heard a scream coming from the deck, followed by a burst of cheers. He didn't know what kind of exciting game they were playing. He smiled and shook his head. He didn't continue to pay attention to the noise around him and devoted himself to identifying the magic array. In just half an hour, he had cracked the magic attached to the shield. Chapter 382. As expected, there were 2 spells attached to the shield. One of them was a level 2 arcane spell, Protective Arrow, and the other was a level 5 arcane spell, Force Wall. The former could block more than 90% of long-range attacks, while the latter could form a layer of invisible energy field on the surface of the shield. Anything that approached would be blocked. For professions that specialized in physical attacks, it was a complete nightmare. After deciphering the mystery, the magic shield lost its appeal to Andre. He only copied the enchantment patterns hidden in the interlayer and studied them slowly when he had time. In the following time, he took out the enchantment blueprint and carefully tried a few more times. Finally, he succeeded in attaching fire damage to a table dagger that he carried with him. After a simple test, Andre immediately had a rough understanding of the power of fire enchantment. When the fire element attached to the surface came into contact with the target, it could instantly release a temperature as high as 500 to 600 degrees Celsius. Once it pierced into the flesh, it could roast the human body alive within 5 seconds. In severe cases, it could even cause partial carbonization. Looking at the dagger in his hand that was emitting a fiery light, Andre secretly estimated the cost-performance ratio. In the end, he had to give up the tempting idea of equipping every soldier in his army with a dagger. There was no other reason. The EXP consumption was a little too much. Although 1 or 2 daggers would not make a difference, once they entered the mode of mass production, it was definitely not something that he could bear alone. If he had so much EXP, it would be better to save it up and raise the level of a mage to level 9 first. It was no wonder that a scholar once said that if magical items were to be popularized, it would have to be like the ancient magical civilization and be willing to invest heavily in apprenticeship education. Only when the number of mages increased would the production of magical items, potions, and scrolls be greatly increased. At the same time, the price would slowly fall. Although ordinary people might still not be able to afford them, it was definitely good news for nobles and merchants who had money but could not buy them. It had to be said that this sentence was very reasonable. After all, every item related to magic was very troublesome to make. Not to mention the various complicated techniques, just the fact that mages had to permanently transfer a part of their mana to the product greatly limited the enthusiasm of production. Perhaps 1 or 2 would be fine, but if there were a lot of them, even a legendary mage might not be able to handle it. Andre did not intend to use up too much of his precious EXP. He still had to raise the level of a mage, at least to level 9. The rest could wait until he learned level 5 arcane spells. Immersed in the world of magic, Andre completely forgot the passage of time. It was only when Chloe pushed the door open and rushed in that he was surprised to find that it was almost midnight. If he did not sleep, he might not be able to get up tomorrow. It must be known that as a spellcaster, more than 8 hours of adequate sleep must be guaranteed. Otherwise, they would not be able to remember new spells the next day. So Andre quickly helped the girl take off her clothes and used magic tricks to clean up her body. Then, he hugged the drunk girl's alluring body and quickly fell into a deep sleep. Just after most of the crew of the Eye of Arcane had fallen asleep, in the independent cabin on the 2nd deck, Clive Crom was kneeling on one knee and asked in a low voice, "Miss, are you really going to give that young man called Andre an invitation letter? He is a noble of Linton City, and I don't think he has the ability to pass the initial assessment at his current age." Rowling sat on a chair and rested her chin on her hand. She chuckled and asked in reply, "Haha, why not? Do you think an ordinary noble youth can become the captain of such a huge ship? Can he subdue the unruly barbarians and sailors? Can he command his subordinates to operate powerful alchemical weapons? Can he obtain the allegiance of the Taflin demon warriors and elven druids? I don't know if you noticed the way the crew looked at him. It was a kind of reverence that came from the bottom of their hearts. It was not an effect brought about by status, prestige, or wealth, but by his powerful personal strength. Coupled with the astonishing wisdom he displayed a few hours ago, I can basically conclude that he must be a mage of a high level. Think about it. How great is the future potential of an official mage who has not yet reached adulthood? I can guarantee that as long as he is willing to give up his human identity, agree to transform himself into an elf, and join the Emerald Leaf Tower to study hard for 20 to 30 years, he will definitely surpass Master Ernest and become the strongest great mage below legend. How? How is this possible? Clivecrum opened his mouth wide in shock and let out a cry of surprise. He did not even care about etiquette and directly stood up from the ground. As the youngest novice knight of the Griffin Knights, he had always felt that he was the genius of the younger generation in the entire South. Whether it was swordsmanship, horsemanship, spearmanship, archery, etiquette, knowledge, or the powerful family behind him, handsome appearance, strong physique, he was outstanding in all aspects. He could almost be called the number one person. But now, a youth that he had never heard of and was much stronger than him in all aspects suddenly popped out. An expression of disbelief instantly appeared on his face. If he did not know the ability of this young lady in front of him to judge people, he might have already refuted. Looking at the novice knight's unwillingness, jealousy, disappointment, and confusion, Rowling stretched out her white and slender hand and gently stroked his face. She said softly, "Clive, you have to remember that this world has never lacked geniuses, so it is best to quickly throw away all the negative emotions in your brain. Otherwise, once you fall into them, you will never be able to step into the highest realm in your lifetime. Open your mind, accept, and even befriend those who are stronger than you, and you'll soon find that not only do you not lose anything, but you will also gain the friendship of a strong person. And this friendship may be able to help you overcome difficulties at any time. The era of the elves has passed. Since the rise of the ancient magic civilization, the entire world has entered the era of humans. Although the once powerful empires have collapsed and split up, humans are still the undisputed masters of this continent. If we want to obtain a better living environment, we must maintain an absolute advantage in the field of magic. That is why every 200 years, we will go to human society to find talents and use the power of arcane magic to transform them into elves. Chapter 383. Rowling couldn't hide the sadness on her face when she mentioned the decline of the elven civilization. However, she quickly controlled her emotions and continued, "You've already been selected as one of the candidates. You have to forget about your original city and family as soon as possible. Let go of those petty grudges and consider the gains and losses from the perspective of the elves. Otherwise, Father won't allow you to become my guardian knight, let alone a member of the Gemflower family. Also, perhaps you haven't noticed, but this ship is extremely fast. Those powerful alchemical weapons are also operated by ordinary sailors. Do you know what this means? This also means that once these skills are spread, the elves' advantage on the sea will quickly shrink or even disappear completely. Perhaps in a one-on-one situation, our magic warships can heavily damage or even sink this ship. However, the humans are never a race that wins by quality. Their most frightening aspect is their terrifying numbers, their ability to learn, and their enterprising spirit. Think about it. If the sea is filled with such terrifying ships, will our magic warships be able to protect the secret of our eternal home from being discovered? So, no matter what, I have to give him an invitation. If possible, we can even make some exchange of benefits. As long as he can promise never to leak the technology to a second person, it's fine even if he has to pay a price. Of course, it would be even better if we can win him over to our side. After all, in this era where arcane magic is on the decline, any magical genius is an extremely precious resource. Even if we can't win him over, we should at least make him a close friend. Once he grows up, he will become a powerful ally. These sincere words weren't in vain. After only a few minutes, Clive Crom's eyes became clear again. He knelt on one knee again and gently kissed the back of Rolling's hand. He solemnly promised, "Please don't worry, I know what to do. From now on, I've officially severed all ties with Bacaro City. I'm also no longer a human." "Very good. I'm very happy that you have such resolve. Get up. It won't be good if the passing sailors hear this." Rolling reached out and gently helped the young knight up. Clycrom got up and shrugged with a smile. "Miss, you're overthinking it. Most of the people on this ship are already drunk. No one will notice us at all. No, it's better to be careful. You go guard the door first. I have to report the situation here to my father. Don't let anyone in to disturb us." After Rolling finished speaking, she immediately took out an amethyst pendant from her clothes and chanted a shaky spell in a low voice. After a while, she entered a spell-casting focus state. The young knight didn't dare to disturb them. He quietly left the room and carefully closed the door. He silently guarded the door of the cabin. His two eyes looked around vigilantly. Once he heard footsteps, he would immediately clench his fists and prepare for battle. The night at sea was very quiet. Other than the sound of waves crashing against the hull, there was only the deafening snoring of the crew. Occasionally, a few seabirds would stop on the mast or pick up some leftovers on the deck. Basically, there were very few people walking around. Suddenly, a strong light burst out from the gap on one side of the hull. In the blink of an eye, it returned to its original state. Even the lookout standing at the top of the mast did not notice it. Unknowingly, the sky gradually turned from dark to bright. Coupled with the fact that there was no shelter, the sun rose much earlier than on land. As the red fireball slowly rose between the sea and the sky, a new day had finally begun. David Herbert Lawrence, who had been hanging on the mast for more than 10 hours, was finally put down by a sailor who had just woken up. At this moment, he was only half alive. If he continued to hang there, he would probably die before noon. However, Bartholomew did not let his former enemy go so easily. He only gave him a piece of bread that had been gnawed on by rats, a small piece of cheese full of maggots, 2 uncooked sausages, and a glass of clear water mixed with wine. He let him recover some strength and wait until he returned to the island to slowly soak in it. It should be known that Orire did not have a tradition of repaying evil with good. As Confucius once said, "If one repaid evil with good, how should one repay evil with good?" From a moment of the rise of mankind, great revanchism had always been prevalent. The aristocrats even wantonly advocated this behavior, believing that it represented tenacity, courage, wisdom, and perseverance. It was an out-and-out virtue. Even if the churches of many good gods repeatedly emphasized that revenge often led to evil and destruction, it was completely useless. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Whatever you did to me in the past, I will take revenge in the future. This was the value that the entire continent agreed upon. From the king to the beggar, there were few exceptions. Although Bartholomew did not know how much Bartholomew had suffered when he fell into the hands of the other party, from what he had done so far, David Herbert Lawrence must have gone overboard. Otherwise, he would not have used such tyrannical means to torture an old man who had one foot in the coffin. "Lazy bum, get up, all of you. It's dawn. The captain's orders. Raise the sails and set sail immediately. Also, send a few men to the merchant ships at the back. If anyone dares to slack off, I will revoke his right to distribute the spoils next time." After fiercely glaring at his archenemy, Bartholomew cracked his whip and roared loudly on the deck. In less than a minute, the sailors, who were still somewhat muddle-headed, emerged from the corners of the Eye of Arcane and began to work. Ever since they received the first huge sum of money in their lives yesterday, their enthusiasm had been fully aroused. Each and every one of them knew very well what a 20% share meant, especially the few burly men who had just been appointed as boatswains and assault captains. Without saying a word, they glared at the men under their jurisdiction. If anyone moved slightly slower, they would immediately give him a kick. Their efficiency had increased more than twofold. As the saying goes, One's but determines one's brain, and one's position determines one's thoughts. A day ago, they were still the lowest-ranked sailors. But now they were already in the management class with official positions. Not only could they receive double the salary and bonus, but they could also enjoy better meals. So naturally, they could no longer be like the sailors, putting on airs at any time. As for the remaining crew members, they were undoubtedly angry but did not dare to say anything. They could only swallow their anger and plan to perform well in the next battle, striving to get a management position. Chapter 384. After all, when old Bartholomew was selecting helpers, he deliberately picked out the bravest few and put them in charge of suppressing the rebellious crew members. In this way, the conflict would shift from the top to the middle. Once the conflict became irreconcilable, he only needed to abandon the few guys with the greatest public resentment to solve the problem. There was no need to worry about riots and the like. Although this trick was almost used up by the rulers, it was still so effective no matter when it was used. To a certain extent, it satisfied the desire of some of the lower-class elites to improve their social class. It was completely a matter of one side being willing to hit and the other side being willing to be hit. With the help of these ferocious men, Bartholomew quickly made the eye of mystical sail at full speed. The several merchant ships at the back were also hung with full sails. One by one, they were dragged behind and quickly moved in the designated direction. As he slept very late, Andre only opened his eyes in a daze when it was close to noon. That was because he felt that the girl in his arms was boiling hot all over. She was squirming nonstop, and at the same time, she was constantly moaning. If he didn't get up soon, he was afraid that something would really happen. One must know that men and women in puberty were particularly susceptible to temptation in the morning. In addition, when two people went to sleep, they basically only had one or two pieces of underwear on them. If things didn't go well, things might go wrong. As a man with normal physiology, Andre never overestimated his resistance to beauty. At the same time, he didn't dare to underestimate the unique charm emanating from Chloe's body. He hurriedly took a deep breath, suppressed his excited nerves, and gently patted the girl's perky buttocks. He asked with a smile, "Good morning, dear. Can you tell me what you're doing?" Chloe, who was suddenly attacked, was startled. She subconsciously shivered, then puffed up her chest that had been getting more and more plump recently, and winked playfully. "Hee, of course I'm doing what I should do. Don't you think it's a great waste to let such a wonderful morning slip away in vain? Hee, you're really a little mischievous girl. But I have to remind you of two things. First, it's no longer morning, but noon. Second, you're not old enough to do this kind of thing. We've agreed before that we should wait until after your 16th birthday. Get up, or I'll spank you." After saying that, Andre stretched out his hand and gently pinched the pink buds on the girl's chest. He turned over and jumped down from the hammock and began to put on his clothes. In fact, a certain part of his body had already been severely congested, and it was difficult to guarantee that he would be able to control himself after lying down for a while longer. He had no choice but to escape from the hammock as quickly as possible and avoid physical contact as much as possible. Otherwise, the possibility of him turning into a beast was definitely more than 50%. Seeing that her seduction plan had failed once again, Chloe pouted unhappily. She lowered her head and glanced at her full twin peaks, flat stomach, slender legs, and slender waist. Inwardly, she thought about where she was lacking and why she would always fail at the critical moment. While she was deep in thought, Andre had already dressed up and returned to the bed. He lifted the girl's sharp chin and kissed her soft lips. Then he stroked her hair and said with a smile, "All right, don't think so much. Hurry up and get up. We have a lot of things to deal with today, and judging by the time, your aunt should be back from the other island. Don't tell me you want to meet her naked." Damn it. Why didn't you say so earlier?" At the mention of Lady Anastasia, Chloe was like a frightened rabbit. She jumped down from the hammock and quickly put on her clothes. As for what she was just thinking about, it was likely that she had already thrown it to the back of her mind. For someone with a very simple personality like her, Thinking about two things at the same time was too taxing on her brain, so she automatically filtered out the former problem. Now, her mind was full of thoughts on how to deal with her aunt. Seeing Chloe return to her energetic self, Andre shook his head with a smile. He turned and opened the door to the captain's cabin and went straight to the deck. He didn't pay attention to the busy crew and directly asked Bartholomew, "How long until we reach our destination?" "According to the current speed, if nothing unexpected happens, we can arrive at our destination in at most 3.5 hours. But you'd better take a look at the two guests on the ship. Since this morning, they have been circling around the alchemical weapon. I seriously suspect that they intend to steal this technology." As he spoke, Bartholomew turned his head and vigilantly glanced at Rowling and Clive Crom, who were pointing at the bronze cannons on the deck. Ever since he saw the power of these big guys, he was like an old hen protecting her chicks. Even the crew would be scolded if they asked too much, let alone two outsiders. Andre's lips curled up slightly. He didn't care at all and spread out his hands. "Don't worry. It's useless even if they learn the casting method. The real thing that can make the cannons display great power isn't the cannon itself, but the black granular powder that it is filled with. Even if they study it for 100 years, they might not be able to find any results." "Are you sure?" Bartholomew's face showed an uncertain expression. "Of course. I'm sure." Andre nodded with certainty. What a joke. How could Earth's modern industrial system be so easy to crack, especially in a world completely dominated by supernatural forces? Not to mention other things, just the problem of proportion alone could torture countless people to death. Not to mention the purification process of sulfur and saltpeter, as well as the method of making the powder into granular powder. If anything went wrong, the black gunpowder would very likely turn from a deadly weapon into a firecracker for people to play with. Of course, the current power wasn't that great. If the bronze cannons fired directly, the effective killing radius was only 800 meters to 1 kilometer. Moreover, shooting beyond 1 kilometer was basically projectile, relying on the weight of the shot put and the acceleration of gravity to kill the target. A hit rate of 5% was already very high. As for the bronze guns, they were even worse. They could only barely pose a threat to plate armor within 50 to 60 meters. The short pistols had to be shot within 15 meters to have any lethality. From a certain perspective, the power of primitive firearms was even inferior to bows, crossbows, and large stone throwers. The only advantage was that they were easy to use. Even sailors without any cultural knowledge could easily learn to use them after a few days of learning. Moreover, they were easy to maintain, ensuring that the gunpowder didn't get wet. After each firing, they just had to clean up the gunpowder residue in the barrel and barrel. Chapter 385. This was also the reason why Andre only used firearms on the ships, instead of building a team of guns or cannons in his territory. The reason was simple. There was no point of leverage when fighting on the sea. Even if there were 100 feudal knights on the enemy's ship, they would only be able to unleash their power when the two ships were close enough. However, as long as he could sink the enemy within 100 meters, all the knights would fall into the sea and feed the fishes. Once the battlefield was changed to land, this tactic would be completely useless. The range of a flintlock was as long as a bow and arrow, especially the projectile shot of a longbow. The distance was more than 5 times that of flintlock. The enemy would only need a few rounds of volleys to beat the musketeers. The cannons would be able to unleash some power, but the feudal knights were not fools. Naturally, they would be able to avoid the trajectory of the cannons. With their extraordinary motor skills, it was impossible for the projectile shot to hit the target. The mages were even more so. A level 2 arcane shield could easily block the bullets of the flintlocks, and a wall of force could slow down the speed of the cannons. Coupled with flying and short-distance teleportation spells, the mages would not be harmed at all. Furthermore, they could also use control spells to make the cannoneers and musketeers turn around and fire at their companions. In summary, Unless Andrei could create the firearms of the First World War, with the current primitive firearms, they could only take advantage of the terrible accuracy of the ballistic cannons at sea. However, to achieve this, the current industrial level of Warrior was definitely not enough. Even if he provided the necessary technology and knowledge, it would take at least 20 or 30 years before the initial results could be seen. If he had the time, he might as well strengthen himself and strive to become an archmage or even a legendary mage as soon as possible. When that time came, a large-scale magic ritual or a legendary spell could instantly release the power of a primitive nuclear weapon. Therefore, firearms and the like were fine to play with. If he took them too seriously, he would be putting the cart before the horse. After all, the ultimate goal of arcane research was to pursue immortality, explore the endless planes, and uncover the mysteries of the universe. The technology on Earth could not achieve these things. Bartholomew did not know that in Andrei's eyes, these bronze cannons and flintlocks were just large toys. He sighed in relief and asked carefully, then, "Do you think we should restrict the movements of those two? I don't think it's a good idea to let them run around the ship. There's no need for that. In any case, the fleet will arrive at our destination in a while. When the time comes, we'll leave them to the Countess. We still have to continue hunting in this area," Andrei replied nonchalantly. Now that the large-scale war quest had begun, it was the perfect opportunity to earn EXP and rewards. He would not let go of such a good opportunity. No matter what, he had to earn as much as he could. Not to mention, he could also rob merchant ships along the way, increasing his income and earning military merits. Why not? In order to encourage more people to participate in the trade war, the Linton City Council had issued a series of rewards and punishments. The most important one was that every time a warship or merchant ship was sunk or captured, not only would one be awarded a certain amount of military merit, one would also be promoted to nobility after accumulating a certain amount of merit. Those who were already nobility would be promoted to nobility, and during this period, all captured ships and goods would have their taxes reduced by half when they were traded. If an important person of the other party was captured, they could also be escorted to the city hall and receive a reward that was double the normal ransom. Money, reputation, status, strength, everything that Andrei desired in his heart could be realized in this war. Coupled with his desire for sail gunships and conquering the sea, what reason did he have not to go all out? At the very least, he had to raise his mage level to 9th level first. In this way, the Eye of Arcane, carrying Andrei's ambitions and dreams, advanced rapidly on the sea. At around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it finally returned to the small island where it was born. After carefully avoiding the surrounding reefs, it retracted its sails and anchored in the bay less than a kilometer away from the shore. Then, it slowly rowed the boat onto the island. It couldn't be helped. The Eye of Arcane was just too big. It simply couldn't dock directly at the edge of the cliff like those small boats with a displacement of less than 300 tons. Otherwise, it would immediately run aground. At that time, it would be difficult to push it back. Without the help of machinery, it was basically a pipe dream to push a 2,000-ton sail battleship into the sea without the help of thousands of people. Therefore, it was better to dock at the deep waters. Fortunately, as a pure gunship, the Eye of Arcane had to maintain its speed advantage. Therefore, it didn't carry any cargo at all and didn't need to dock at the shore. It was just docked far away in the bay. On the other hand, the other 5 merchant ships were a little troublesome. Even Andrei himself didn't know whether he should unload the cargo and sort it out, or put on the ship first and take it with him when he returned to Lincoln City. When they set off, there was only one ship. When they returned, there were 5 more, and all of them were armed merchant ships flying the flag of Bacarlo. Anyone who wasn't an idiot would know what was going on. The sailors who stayed on the island ran to the shore like crazy, took off their shirts, and waved them vigorously. At the same time, they cheered loudly as if they were welcoming the triumphant return of a general who had won the battle. Their cheers were so loud that even Countess Anastasia, who had just returned from transporting a ship full of salt, was alarmed. She hurried to the beach with her retainers and guards. At a glance, She saw the Eye of Arcane docked in the bay and the 5 captured merchant ships. She was instantly shocked, speechless. In particular, the huge hull of the Eye of Arcane, as well as the color and horrifying decorations on the sails, gave people a creepy feeling at first glance. Coupled with the ferocious deck cannons on both sides, even a fool could feel the murderous aura coming from a ship. The Countess stared at the most powerful gunship in the southern seas with her eyes wide open. After a moment of silence, she asked Anthony in an incredulous tone, Oh, my God, don't tell me the huge ship was built by Andre. It's almost twice the size of the largest warship in service in the South. Didn't the ship designer of Lincoln City say that? The displacement of a wooden ship can never exceed 1,500 tons. But look at this ship. It's probably 2,000 tons. It's incredible. Chapter 386. Madam, don't forget that Sir Andre is a knowledgeable wizard. He might even have a huge family with a long history behind him. It's completely reasonable for him to be able to come up with such shocking things. Think about it. How many things have been done since he appeared that ordinary people have been able to do? Let's not even talk about his shocking achievements in arcane magic. Just the 2 techniques of drying salt from seawater and purification are enough to make any family go crazy. There's also the advanced farming techniques in Tua's Valley, as well as the concentrated breeding of poultry and livestock. I heard that the number of chicken, duck, and goose eggs produced every day is as high as 25,000. At an average price of 1 copper for 5 eggs, that's more than 35 gold coins in profit. That's 1,050 gold coins in a month and 12,775 gold coins in a year. Some of them are pickled into salted eggs using a special method. It's said that they can be preserved for a year or so. Not only do they provide sufficient nutrition, they also provide salt. Many merchant groups and fleets are buying them in bulk, and there's no need to worry about sales. Apart from that, his private army is actively expanding towards the north. Along the way, they'll attack any monster tribes they come across, killing those that dare to resist. They'll tie up the rest and sell them as slaves to the mine owners around the city. They've even gone tens of kilometers into the border forest and have begun building a castle at a strategic location. It won't be long before they'll expand their territory by more than 20 times. With a large piece of land, he'll be able to buy slaves and attract serf from the inland areas to quickly strengthen himself. Coupled with his reputation as a potion master and his identity as the successor of the Association of Wizards, President Boris, he'll definitely become one of the strongest forces in Linton City in the future. Perhaps it's time for you to consider that suggestion. Anthony lowered his voice and whispered into his mistress' ears. He gave her a detailed report of all the information he'd gathered so that she could have a clear understanding of the current situation. After all, Andre was no longer the young mage who had just arrived a few months ago. Through a series of daring risks and meticulous plans, the power he grasped was enough to influence many of the higher-ups. Their original cooperation with the Mariel family had turned from a weak one to a strong one. They could no longer treat this rising noble with the same attitude as before. Having received a strict, aristocratic education, Countess Anastasia was not a fool. On the contrary, she was very smart. Otherwise, she would not have been able to charm a group of powerful men. She immediately nodded thoughtfully. You have a point, Anthony. I really should change my attitude towards him and treat him like a true ally. Since fate has given the Mariel family such a chance, I shouldn't let it slip through my fingers, right? The guard immediately bowed deeply. My lady, you are always wise and far-sighted. I believe that as long as we can maintain this alliance, House Mariel will one day become one of the top nobles of the Green Sea Alliance. You will also become the Duchess of Lincoln City. I hope so. At the very least, it won't be worse than a few months ago. By the way, have you made any progress on the matter I asked you to secretly investigate? What is my brother doing? Why hasn't he replied to my letters yet? Countess Anastasia asked with furrowed brows. Ever since she deduced that someone was secretly plotting against her family, She had been secretly searching for the enemy's true identity. Especially recently, her communication with Napri City had been completely cut off. No matter how many letters she sent, there was no reply. This made her a little worried. "I'm very sorry. I only found out that Count Luke has been madly pursuing a female knight. Her name is Mia. She first appeared half a year ago in the outskirts of Napri City. It is said that she is very powerful, and many male knights are no match for her. I heard that in order to spend more time with this woman, the Count has been staying in an inn for a long time and hasn't returned to his manor outside the city for a long time." At the mention of this matter, Anthony's expression instantly turned grave, and his eyes flashed with a cold light. With the sixth sense he had honed over the years of adventuring, he could clearly sense that this whole matter was full of schemes. One had to know that Count Luke was known as the Fox Hunter by the nobles of Napri City, which meant that he was more cunning than a fox. He had always been the one to set traps for others. How could he be captivated by a mere woman, no matter how beautiful or sexy she was? There was no doubt that Count Luke either had his own difficulties, or he was being controlled or tempted by some supernatural power. No matter which one it was, an unimaginable horror was brewing behind it. Countess Anastasia clearly understood the seriousness of the matter. She subconsciously clenched her fists, and after a full minute, she gritted her teeth and said, "Investigate. Continue the investigation. No matter who is behind this, I want to know their name. Please don't worry. I've already sent at least 10 spies to Napri City. We'll have concrete news before long." Anthony promised without hesitation. "All right, that's all for now. Now, let's go and welcome our victorious allies. We'll also take a look at the cargo on the captured merchant ships. Remember, don't let them know about my brother's current situation. Otherwise, it won't be easy to deal with Chloe if she makes a fuss." After giving her final instructions, Countess Anastasia led the way to the crude dock that was temporarily built with wood. Anthony followed closely behind with a few powerful guards, and soon arrived at the bustling seaside. After a period of construction and renovation, the side of the island near the depth of the water had taken on the embryonic form of a port town. A large number of wooden houses had been built. Some were used as temporary warehouses, while others were used as residences for the sailors. Although they looked very crude, they were enough to provide shelter from the wind and rain. Rowing the small boats, a large number of crew members came to the shore one after another, excitedly showing off their harvest. These strong men who lived at the bottom of society did not understand the so-called modesty and restraint at all. As soon as they jumped off the boat, they boasted about their harvest at the top of their lungs. They even described the Eye of Arcane that was docked in the harbor as a ghost ship from the river Styx that could easily crush the enemy. Andre had no intention of stopping such unreliable rumors. He allowed the sailors to spread them around, while he lightly leaped onto the newly built plank road. He quickly stepped forward and bowed slightly to Countess Anastasia, who was waiting by the shore. Chapter 387. Good afternoon, Countess. I didn't expect you to be back so soon. How is it? Is the expansion over there complete? Of course. I've doubled the size of the Salpan and shipped back a ship of finished products. At this rate, all the cargo ships will be filled in half a month at most. You, on the other hand, managed to build a super battleship in just a week. That's really amazing. Tell me, what other amazing things do you plan to make next? As she spoke, Lady Anastasia took 2 steps forward and kissed Andre's cheek with a smile as a sign of intimacy. After accepting the kiss politely, Andre shrugged his shoulders with a smile. Hee, you really think too highly of me. You have to know that this is already the limit of what we can do now. It's all thanks to Borg's help. Otherwise, it would take more than half a month just to build a dock. Oh, by the way, those merchant ships have a lot of goods. I hope you can help me deal with them when you return. As for the ship, leave it at the port for now. I'll deal with it when I get back. In fact, if it weren't for the eggs provided by the old butler, he wouldn't have been able to make the activating potion. Without the activating potion, building a wooden ship with a displacement of about 2,000 tons would take at least a year and a half to complete. Perhaps Aurere's industrial system was abnormally weak, but magic could play a huge role in making up for it. Sometimes, magic could even be more exaggerated and ridiculous than the most advanced technology on Earth in the 21st century. For example, the activating potion could actually temporarily give life to inorganic substances and make them act according to orders. It was equivalent to saving all the manpower. The shipbuilding industry that usually required hundreds of shipbuilders to work together could be replaced by just a few dozen bottles of potion. The production efficiency was increased by more than 1,000%. Apart from that, there were many incredible things about magic. For example, druids could control plants. Evil priests could control the undead. Bards could also release powerful magic through singing and playing, and mages were the best among all the spellcasting professions. No matter in terms of quantity or quality, mages were ranked first. As an 8th level mage and potion master, Andre had mastered many terrifying abilities. As long as he wanted to, he could make plague potions at any time and pour them into the water source of the city. In a few days, the magic plague would begin to wreak havoc. At most, it would take a week for most of the ordinary citizens to be turned into undead creatures. It could be said that ever since Andre obtained the book Encyclopedia of Magic Potions, his destructive power had skyrocketed. He was now qualified to be called a humanoid biochemical weapon. Even he was sometimes frightened by the effects of some potions and didn't even dare to try them. The Encyclopedia of Magic Potions, which recorded the essence of the most prosperous period of the magic civilization thousands of years ago, was a rare treasure for any spellcaster. Not to mention the large number of precious formulas that had been lost, just the dozens of complicated mixing methods were enough to make all the potion masters in the world go crazy. It was like Pandora's box, satisfying Andre's imagination of the most glorious era of human beings, especially the technology of poisons, plagues, and diseases that could quickly spread death and panic. It was not inferior to the biochemical weapons in his previous life at all. Just from this point alone, he could infer how advanced the magic technology was at that time. In addition to the huge city that was rumored to be floating in the sky, a fantasy-like super-civilization appeared in his mind. But it was a pity that such a great civilization had been destroyed by the hands of the gods. Only a few words were left behind, and the ruins were scattered all over the continent. As for the huge city floating in the sky, when the civilization was destroyed, it fell from a height of thousands of meters and was smashed into pieces. All the buildings, including the foundation, collapsed. Needless to say, the residents on top were all turned into meat paste. With the baptism of thousands of years, they were probably completely weathered, and not a trace of them could be found. As a smart person who was mostly rational, Andre could not understand why the legendary Lich would give him a book that recorded such important knowledge. He also could not understand the Lich's motive. Could it be that the Lich had really taken a fancy to his talent? Or was it that the Lich was looking forward to the battle between him and Loretta Botons? Or was there some other conspiracy after they parted? Without any information, he simply couldn't find a reason that could convince him. Generally speaking, the higher the level of a mage, the higher their intelligence. A legendary mage who was above level 20 or even level 30 would have an intelligence level that was beyond the scope of mortals. No matter if it was the way of thinking or the breadth of thinking, it was far beyond what ordinary people could guess. Perhaps a plan that was perfect in the eyes of ordinary people was a huge sieve in the eyes of the Lich. There were loopholes everywhere, just like how the inhabitants of the civilized world despised the primitive tribes in the wild. Andre was not sure what exactly he was in the eyes of the Lich. An exquisite toy, a young mage who seemed to have great potential, a pawn that could be used, an important actor in a play, or even one of the main characters. Mystery. Everything was a mystery. To be honest, he hated the feeling of being manipulated by an unknown force and being unable to resist. But fortunately, the legendary Lich only set up a trap and observed the development of the situation silently. He didn't interfere too much and allowed the two parties to act freely. That was why it wasn't too uncomfortable. At least, it was much better than being a captive of the necromancer. Just like that, Andre pondered over the legendary Lich's intentions while chatting with Anastasia. Soon, they arrived at the largest wooden house by the shore. Although it looked crude from afar, the interior of the house was rather unique. Not only was the floor covered with expensive handmade carpet, but the surrounding furniture and furnishings were also expensive. It was obvious that they were brought from Linton City. It seemed that the Countess intended to use this place as one of her supply points. After all, although this island was not considered large, it was rich in flora, fauna, and freshwater resources. There was even a freshwater lake near the center. The surrounding soil was fertile and could support at least a few thousand people by planting some crops and vegetables. As a transit station, a supply point, and a secret base, it was more than enough to satisfy the needs. Chapter 388. After the two of them sat down, Anthony quickly drove away all the irrelevant people around them. He then left the wooden house and silently guarded the door to prevent anyone from eavesdropping. He was well aware that in Hua's upcoming meeting would likely involve some secrets. No outsiders could be present, or else the consequences would be unthinkable if word of it got out. Andre lifted his cup and took a sip of the fresh coconut juice he'd just gotten from the tree. He raised his head and looked into Anastasia's eyes, the corners of his mouth rising as he asked with a playful expression, "Please speak. What do you want to tell me after driving everyone away?" Anastasia took a deep breath and solemnly replied, "I need to know what you're really thinking. What do you want to do? I can sense that you've been rapidly expanding your influence recently, roping in potential collaborators. You're even willing to share your benefits with others. This isn't how nobles normally do things." "Haha, your senses are very sharp, Countess." "That's right, I'm truly expanding my influence. To be more precise, I'm accumulating strength in preparation for the upcoming storm. I'll tell you the truth. I've already found out who's been causing trouble in the shadows. At the same time, I've reached a few agreements with him, agreeing that we won't attack each other for a year and we'll decide the victor after that. It's clear that the victor between us will become the new ruler of Linton City, so we need to unite all the forces we can and rope in all the allies we can rope in. Then, we need to kick out those irrelevant people as quickly as possible. At the very least, we need to establish a massive alliance of interest before the end of the year." With that, Andre's eyes flashed with a cold light. His entire body suddenly gave off a chilling aura, and his fiery red hair burst out with sparks. This was a clear indication of his current mood. Hearing this, Lady Anastasia immediately stood up and asked in a loud voice, "Who is it? Tell me who he is." "Loretta Botons, the weakest duke of Linton City on the surface, but the power he secretly controls surpasses the other 3 dukes combined. Most importantly, he's a true great mage, not at all inferior to President Boris. From a certain perspective, he might even be a little stronger." Without any hesitation, Andre gave the answer directly. He didn't think there was anything worth hiding, especially when the woman sitting opposite him was his closest ally. To be exact, she was his relative. It would be better to know earlier so that he could be mentally prepared and avoid panic when the time came. "Loretta Botons?" A look of disbelief appeared on Lady Anasta's face. She looked as if she had been struck by lightning. She fell into a daze, and it took her a long time to recover. She resisted the urge to shout out loud and lowered her voice as she muttered to herself, How is this possible? He's a duke, the only son of the Boltons family of the Green Sea Alliance. He was born with a golden spoon in his mouth. None of his siblings fought with him for the right of inheritance, and no one dared to take the initiative to violate his rights. Why would he take such a huge risk to overthrow the order of Linton City? Andre shrugged helplessly. "Sorry, I don't know, and I don't want to know. In my opinion, this guy's mental state is clearly a little abnormal, and his way of thinking is also very different from normal people. But don't worry, even if we lose, we'll just give up and admit defeat at most. Our lives won't be in danger. Please treat it as a game. No matter if we win or lose, we'll have a chance to make a comeback." Ever since that conversation, he had discovered that Loretta Boton's mental state temperament, way of speaking, behavior, and so on, all of them revealed a strange contradiction. On one hand, he was like a wise archmage, skilled in long-term planning and adaptable to the situation. He could be said to be full of wit. On the other hand, this person had a crazy idea, especially when he was emotional. He would instantly fall into a temporary state of fanaticism, and his whole person would be completely uncontrolled by reason, releasing the negative emotions suppressed in the bottom of his heart to his heart's content. Without a doubt, Andre couldn't figure out whether these things were deliberately displayed by the other party or the signs of schizophrenia. But he'd rather believe it than not. He decided to list Loretta Botons as an extremely dangerous lunatic for the time being. Anyway, no matter how bad the situation was, it wouldn't be worse than dealing with a rational lunatic. Damn it, I used to think that he was a little introverted, didn't like to talk much, and was very low-key when dealing with people. I really didn't expect him to hide so deeply. Lady Anasta of Western Xia cursed in a low voice while calming down her agitated emotions. After a while, she completely calmed down. That's why it's said that you can't judge a book by its cover. This world is very dangerous, and some people are far from being as simple as they seem on the surface. At this point, Andre smiled meaningfully. Please be prepared, my lady. In the next 1 to 2 months, I will make myself, in the eye of Arcane, the most terrifying conqueror of these seas. Your mission is to take this opportunity to help me create a heroic image. You must let everyone in Lincoln City know that I have a giant ship that can overturn the situation of the entire southern seas, and at the same time, I have mastered its manufacturing process. I believe that it won't take long for the nobles to realize what this means. Without any hesitation, Lady Anasta of Western Xia nodded directly. No problem. I will help you take care of everything in the city. The conservatives, led by Count George Mantell, will also help in the dark. As long as you can guarantee that the captured merchant ships are continuously sent back, it won't be long before the entire Lincoln City will be spreading the news of your heroic battle. Prestige and reputation were wonderful things. Sometimes they were worthless, but other times they were invaluable. Andre now had enough strength, so he began to plan to match his reputation in order to compete with Loretta Boton's status as a duke. Otherwise, it would be difficult for a mere baron to clash with a duke in name. At least in the eyes of most nobles, it would be illegitimate. This was not to be underestimated. The Oleo continent was a place dominated by feudal systems, and after thousands of years of evolution, many conventions had formed. For example, the serfs were loyal to the lesser nobles were loyal to the greater nobles, and the greater nobles were loyal to the king. The chain of events was closely linked, and anyone who broke this rule would be viewed with hostility by all the rulers around them. Chapter 389. In fact, Lincoln City was a republic. Most of the nobles had different statuses, but there was no clear subordinate relationship. Important matters were decided through voting by the city council, while trivial matters were taken care of by the established administrative system. As long as the alliance between the dukes was not shaken, no matter how big the changes in the city were, it would be fine. A republic, what an advanced political system. Didn't it sound very high and mighty? Not at all. The so-called republic here referred to the republic between the nobles and the merchants. Usually, it had nothing to do with the ordinary citizens. They were even deprived of the right to express their opinions. They could only survive under layers of exploitation. The only chance they had to participate in political affairs was to change their social class and identity. As everyone knew, when humans moved from the wilderness to civilization, they also slowly transformed from primitive tribes. Therefore, the initial political system in most areas changed from the elder system to the republic system. This was the same whether it was in Orier or on Earth. One day, when the balance of power was broken and one person or family gained overwhelming power, the republic system would develop into an autocratic monarchy. It could even evolve into a centralized empire. However, it was obvious that in the South, where there were many dukes, it was almost impossible to achieve such a thing. Even the four dukes of Linton City only controlled a quarter to a third of the city's power, so the aristocratic republic system was maintained to this day. The city council was one of the embodiments of this system, and the situation in the other city-states of the Green Sea Alliance was similar. Without a doubt, such a political environment where there was no subordinate relationship and benefits were divided by quarrels and wrangling was very conducive to the breeding of conspiracies and secret deals. Just like what Andre was doing now, he was using a series of benefits to tie more and more nobles who had real power to him. When the time came for a full-scale operation, he did not even need to do anything. The nobles would naturally stand out to protect the entire alliance for their own benefits. With her keen intuition and communication skills from years of mingling in high society, Lady Anasta was very clear on who to rope in and who to strike down in order to become a top noble in Linton City. After a few minutes of consideration, she asked, "Are you sure you want to be an enemy of the pro-war faction?" The Blood Marquis, Kyrgyzstan Brest, is not an easy person to deal with. He has always been known for his unyielding attitude. There are even rumors that he likes to use cruel means to torture his enemies. Listen to their screams and wails before they die. Huh? Cruel? Tyrannical by nature? Andre smiled contemptuously. Anyone who wasn't blind could see the disdain in his eyes. Please don't worry, madam. I've already seen with my own eyes what true cruelty and ruthlessness is. If that person is a demon that crawled out of the bottomless abyss, then Kyrgyz is at best a hateful dog. If I want, I can crush him like a bug at any time. Our real enemy has never been Kyrgyzstan, nor the pro-war nobles, but the viper who has been stirring up trouble in the dark. His name is Gavin Lauren, a senior member of the Sorcerers Association. I believe you're no stranger to him. Gavin Lauren? When did you have a grudge with him? How come no one has ever mentioned it to me? Lady Anastasia asked with a face full of disbelief. Andre pretended to shrug his shoulders helplessly and explained, "It's simple. His goal is the position of president of the Sorcerers Association. For that, he didn't hesitate to become an enemy of a large number of traditional sorcerers. And Master Boris has listed me as the successor of the president. Just based on this alone, even if there wasn't any conflict before, there is now one. And it's a conflict that can't be resolved at all. Unless I take the initiative to give up the position, he will definitely become my enemy. But if I take the initiative to give up the position, I may offend Master Boris. As the saying goes, choose the lesser of two evils. Offending a senior sorcerer is much better than offending a terrifying archmage, isn't it?" Lady Anastasia nodded in realization. "I see. If you list him as an enemy, not only can you get the support of Master Boris, but you may also have the control of one of the three major forces in the city, the Sorcerers Association. It is indeed a very advantageous choice. But you'd better be careful. Gavin Lauren is not as simple as he looks. There are rumors that he has secretly carried out cruel live experiments. It seems that he is creating something terrible." "Oh, live experiments? That's really unpleasant news." Andre's eyes flashed with a chilling light. Perhaps it was because he had personally experienced being ravaged by a necromancer. He was very repulsed by live experiments, especially on humans. To be exact, he hated it. If the consequences were not serious, he would definitely make them experience what it meant to be worse than death. It was quite obvious that Gavin Lauren had touched a sensitive nerve of his. Not only that, he was an enemy that he would never be able to reach an agreement with. That was why it was time to get rid of this person as soon as possible. Not only that, he had to be quick and ruthless. He absolutely couldn't give Gavin Lauren a chance to counterattack. Lady Anastasia read the expression on Andre's face and lowered her voice to remind him, "Be careful. If it's not necessary, it's best not to make too much noise. Otherwise, the result may be very troublesome. You should know that the last time two senior members of the Sorcerers Association fought in the sky above the city, the impact was very bad. It hasn't been completely eliminated yet. If you go too far, many nobles will stand on the opposite side of us." Andre's mouth curved up slightly, revealing a meaningful smile. "I understand. If the situation really comes to the point where we need to kill him quickly, then I will choose to submit an application for a magic duel. I believe that with Gavin Lauren's character and position, he can't refuse even if he wants to. At that time, I will kill him in a fair and square duel. At the same time, I can also deter the dissatisfied people in the association. The tradition of magic duels had a long history. Even the mages themselves didn't know how far back it was. As an extreme way to solve a conflict, once both sides agreed to it, it was equivalent to signing a life and death contract. No matter if one side died or was disabled, the other side did not have to bear any responsibility. Chapter 390. In many people's eyes, Gavin Lauren was an undeniable expert in magic duels. He had personally killed several enemy mages in battle and had won quite a bit of fame. However, in Andre's eyes, he was just a guy who had overestimated himself. Although his spellcasting level might be slightly higher if he went all out, killing him would definitely not be a problem. This was the confidence of a transmigrator. At the same time, Andre's understanding and application of arcane magic was different from most mages in this world. He would definitely be able to shock anyone who fought with him. It was like when most street thugs fought with sticks and props, but if someone suddenly barged in and took out a submachine gun from behind and fired at the crowd, it would be strange if they could get used to it. Of course, this did not mean that Andre had such a huge advantage. Instead, it meant that his spell casting, timing, and usage of magic items, potions, and scrolls were often unexpected, giving people a feeling of being caught off guard. Apart from the above, there were all sorts of gadgets on his body, such as gunpowder pistols, hidden arrows, and simple bombs. There were also potions that could produce all sorts of effects. If he threw them all out in one go, even a great mage would inevitably be at a disadvantage, let alone Gavin Lauren. Andre was not an ordinary mage who only thought about how to use powerful arcane spells to defeat his enemies. As long as he could kill his opponent, he did not mind using poison, daggers, throwing knives, bows, and arrows. He also did not mind using psychological tactics such as kidnapping, threats, intimidation, and verbal provocation. In short, people like him who achieve their goals by hook or by crook refer to people like him. In the following time, the two of them talked about strengthening their cooperation. Lady Anastasia agreed to help recruit a group of trustworthy people in the name of the Mariel family to establish a large merchant association for Andre. They would also share all the trade routes in their hands. Andre was also very generous. Not only did he take out his knowledge of agriculture, he also taught him how to make soy products, pickled eggs, how to raise poultry on a large scale, and how to make some condiments such as soy sauce and vinegar. Do not underestimate these. The food culture in Orire was not developed. Although the southern coastal cities, led by Linton City, had begun to have a European Renaissance atmosphere, the main condiments were only salt, honey, unprocessed brown cane sugar, olive oil or oil fried from animal fats, garlic, ginger, cumin, pepper, and other spices. The stronger the taste of the dishes, the better. Therefore, both soy sauce and vinegar were very suitable for the taste of the upper class of this era. Once they were put into the market as luxury goods, they would definitely make a lot of money. In addition, soy, also known as soybeans, was always used to feed livestock due to their taste and taste. Not only their price was ridiculously cheap, but they were also produced in abundance. If they were made into delicious and easy to preserve, they would definitely be the favorite of the army, fleet, merchant, and adventurers. Abner, the chief of internal affairs of the Two Ways Valley, could earn hundreds of gold coins a day just by processing soy products. He even opened up the supply to the slaves and barbarians under his command, saving a lot of food expenses. After all, soybeans were rich in nutrients, especially with a high protein content. They were also very fragrant. No one would have any objections if they were used to replace a part of the grain. Even the residue left after oil extraction could be made into cake dregs, which could be used as feed for horses, pigs, chickens, ducks, and geese. It could be said that it was a good business with little capital and huge profits. Most importantly, In this world, people had not yet realized that oil could be extracted from soybeans. Therefore, Andre did not mind sharing it with his closest ally. After all, he did not have the production capacity to meet the huge demand of the market. Instead of benefiting others, he would rather benefit his own people. Looking at the knowledge recorded in the notebook, Lady Anastasia's eyes were filled with passion. It was as if Andre was not just a handsome young man sitting in front of him, but a huge treasure. As long as she continued to dig deeper, she would definitely find more, and more good things. The greed of human beings was endless. As they accumulated more and more wealth and power, their desires would also increase exponentially. Perhaps for a beggar who was about to starve to death, a piece of bread and a bowl of hot soup would be enough to make him feel the ultimate happiness. However, for a high-ranking noble with a net worth of hundreds of thousands, or even millions of gold coins, even 100,000 gold coins might not make him feel too happy. He might even be seriously dissatisfied and feel that his wealth was accumulating too slowly. Although Lady Anastasia didn't necessarily know this, she was doing the same thing. She did not decline at all, nor did she show any embarrassment. She immediately put the notebook carefully into her close-fitting clothes. Then she raised her head and pretended to be playful as she blinked her eyes. Wow, this is a very precious gift. I didn't expect you to be so generous as to take it all out at once. I thought you would slowly keep me in suspense one by one. Andre smiled playfully and spread out his hands. My lady, you have to understand that some things are just tools for me to accumulate wealth. It's normal for me to share some of them with my allies. As for the other things, they are core secrets that I will never tell anyone, just like the secrets of the special weapons on the ship. There is no other reason other than that these secrets are too dangerous. Once they are spread out, the consequences will be unimaginable. As a smart person, he knew very well that the knowledge he brought from Earth was not important. Even if it was spread out, it would not be a big deal. However, the knowledge that he brought from Earth might cause a violent upheaval. Once a second person knew about it, the whole world might change drastically. For example, increasing the output of agriculture and animal husbandry, increasing the number of spices or cooking methods, increasing the output of salt, and so on. Even if the whole continent knew about it, at most, they would not be able to enjoy the huge benefits brought by the monopoly. At worst, they could do something else to make money. However, if the secrets of black powder, steam engines, trains, airships, and so on were known by others, it would be a big deal. Not to mention that the combination of magic civilization and the modern industrial system on Earth might bring about incredible changes. The indirect aftermath alone was enough to cause a devastating blow to the feudal system. Chapter 391. The prevalence of feudalism was based on the premise that humans were constantly threatened by monsters in the wild. Coupled with the extremely inconvenient transportation and communication, the kings had no choice but to infect large areas of land to the nobles who were loyal to them. The nobles continued to infect the smaller nobles, and the smaller nobles were finally infect to the knights, forming a set of stable, top-down rule. If there was an invasion, the knights and nobles would undoubtedly fight to the death because under their feet was their own land, and behind them was their home. If they did not fight to the death, it would be very likely that they would lose everything they cherished. On the contrary, if it was the bureaucrats, once they saw that the situation was not good, they would definitely turn around and run without saying a word. The reason was very simple. The land under their feet belonged to the king, and the villages and towns behind them also belonged to the king. Even the serfs who were responsible for farming were the private property of the king. Only their own lives belonged to them. If they did not run now, when would they? In fact, in the history of Earth, the more feudal a country was, the more difficult it was for foreign enemies to conquer it. The more centralized a country was, the easier it was for foreign enemies to conquer it. In the former, even if the royal family or the royal family perished, the remaining nobles would continue to rebel for their own interests until the invaders could no longer bear it and completely withdrew from the occupied land. In a centralized country, Once the highest ruling family was killed or surrendered, the bureaucrats in various places would either scramble to surrender or split up into warlords and fight endlessly. Selfishness was human nature, especially in special moments when their lives were threatened. Most people would usually think of themselves first, so it was not surprising that they would do something out of line. This was also why history had always been promoting the loyal ministers and warriors who sacrificed their lives for the country. It was because they were the minority. Otherwise, how could they be erected as role models? Orire was a primitive, backward, and barbaric world. Human activities occupied less than 1/10 of the area, and the rest were all endless primeval forests, vast wastelands, and lofty mountains. It was the most suitable soil for the feudal system to survive, and at the same time, it also ensured that the human race could always slowly expand outwards. However, once things like black gunpowder, steam engines, trains, airships, and other things spread, the entire race would quickly enter a terrible era, an era of great collapse. Since the king now had cheaper and more powerful weapons, he no longer needed his vassals to provide him with soldiers and knights. Therefore, he would definitely choose to weaken the power of the nobles. The nobles would also fight to the death in order to not lose the rights and lands in their hands. The conflicts that had been hidden in the dark would suddenly erupt, and half of the continent would be plunged into turmoil and war. No matter which side won, the feudal system would collapse. Many centralized countries would be established, and they would fight and conquer each other until one or a few super empires were born. They would restrain and depend on each other for survival. Of course, this didn't include the series of consequences caused by excessive production. Just the large number of unsaleable goods was enough to destroy the current fragile economic system. Coupled with a lack of population, humans would probably die before they could complete the Industrial Revolution. In his previous life, Andre had read a lot of books. He knew how terrible the economic depression caused by unsaleable goods was. This thing was like a terrible beast, destroying everything around it. Even the gods would be helpless. As the saying went, the progress of science and technology was never achieved overnight. Many factors, including population, income, purchasing power, economic structure, and so on, had to be taken into consideration. Then a 5-year, 10-year, or even 20-year development plan had to be formulated. Step by step, the goal of increasing productivity had to be achieved. As a transmigrator, Andre had never intended to use his knowledge to change the world. He also didn't think that Earth's technology would be more advanced than the ancient magic civilization. Therefore, he would never disclose his core knowledge to anyone. At most, he would use it on a small scale in private to ensure that the secret would not be leaked. Don't worry, I'm only interested in businesses that can make money. I have no interest in those powerful alchemy weapons. Also, regarding the content of this notebook, I swear to keep it strictly confidential and will never let outsiders know. Lady Anastasia seemed to have noticed something and immediately made a promise. She was afraid that this young man in front of her would be displeased and affect their increasingly close relationship. Thank you. I'm relieved that you think so. Oh, right, I've captured 3 captives this time. Please send a letter to Bakarov City to ask for ransom. Once the ransom is received, release them. Andre stood up and bowed slightly, with one hand on his chest, taking the initiative to end this in-depth conversation. Anastasia also stood up and bowed back. She replied with a smile, "No problem. I'll be returning to Lincoln City in a week or so. I'll ask for the ransom according to each person's identity, status, and family strength. If nothing unexpected happens, the ransom will be delivered in about half a month. Thank you very much. You've been a great help. You should know that I can't handle this kind of negotiation. If I capture any more captives in the future, I'll hand them over to you. Please remember, don't try to investigate the background of those 2 young men. Their identities are a bit special, and knowing too much won't do us any good. It's better to pretend that we don't know anything." In order to prevent any accidents, Andre gave a last-minute warning before leaving the wooden house and walking towards the temporary dock. He hadn't gone far when Anthony, who was guarding the door, immediately rushed into the house and asked nervously, "Madam, how did it go?" "Haha, it went very well. He wasn't as difficult as I expected. On the contrary, he was very generous. I got a lot of good things that can make a lot of money. Be prepared. When we return to the city this time, we'll be completely free. Maybe it won't be long before the political situation in Lincoln City becomes violent. It's a good opportunity to expand our influence." After that, Lady Anastasia subconsciously touched the notebook in her arms, and there was a trace of expectation in her eyes. "Is that so? That's great. I'll recruit some reliable people as soon as I return to the city. I guarantee that it won't delay your plan," Anthony said excitedly. Anastasia nodded with a smile. "Work hard. If the plan succeeds, I'll help you get a knight or a baron title and give you a beautiful manor at the same time." Perhaps it was because she was in a good mood, but she uncharacteristically gave a promise in advance without any hesitation, as if it was a matter of course. Chapter 392. After Anthony heard this, he immediately knelt down on one knee and thumped his chest with reddened eyes. "You are really a generous mistress. I swear to be loyal to you and your family forever. I will never betray you." "Very well. Go about your business. Also call Chloe over. I have something to tell her." "Understood." Andre didn't stay on the island for too long. He only rested for a night to replenish his water supply and fresh fruits before setting sail again. He continued to sail toward the trade routes of Bakharov and soon disappeared into the horizon. He didn't know what Anastasia had said to her niece. Ever since they entered the deep sea, Chloe's eyes had been strange. She seemed to be in a daze from time to time. Even though the girl was usually in a daze, it seemed to have become more serious now. One of her hands was clutching something in her right pocket, but he didn't know what it was. To humans, the sea was always so vast that they couldn't find the end of it in their lifetime. Whether it was the intelligent creatures hidden in the shadows, the giant sea monsters, or the vicious pirates on the surface, they were all things that could take a human's life. The slightest carelessness could lead to a tragic end. At this moment, on the calm surface of the sea, a giant black sailboat was riding the wind and breaking the waves. It was rapidly charging toward 5 large warships that were only half its size. It was like a lion charging into a pack of hyenas. Be it size or firepower, they weren't on the same level. Even though the warships flying the flag of Bakharov were equipped with a considerable number of ballistas, and even covered the stone balls with blazing fire glue, it was almost impossible to hit the fast-moving target with projectiles. Dozens of stone balls were hurled, and only 4 of them hit the deck. Wood splinters flew everywhere, but fortunately, there were no casualties. "Fire extinguishers! Fire extinguishers! Hurry up and put out those damned blazing fire gums. If you burn the hull, I'll skin you alive." Bartholomew, the vice-captain of the ship, roared in a hoarse voice. Ever since he boarded the Eye of Arcane, he had treated the ship as his lover. To be exact, he was even gentler and more careful than a lover. He would be distressed for half a day if the paint was damaged, let alone a few large holes caused by the stone balls. His temper was especially irritable. The sailors who were already prepared rushed forward after hearing the order. They poured a bucket of sand over the fire without a word. In just a dozen seconds, they stopped the fire from spreading by cutting off oxygen. Although the blazing fire glue was a magical creation, it couldn't burn without oxygen. The fire was quickly extinguished by the sand. They just had to wrap it with sand and throw it directly into the sea after the battle. Seeing that the enemy's ship was getting closer and closer, Andre narrowed his eyes and raised his right hand. "Captain's orders! Gunners! Gunners! Gunners!" Following the hoarse roars of several messengers, the cannons on both sides of the ship opened. The sailors in charge of operating the bronze cannons pushed the cannon carriage out and aimed the black muzzle at the enemy's ship, nervously waiting for the order to fire. After many naval battles, they were already proficient in loading ammunition, quickly cleaning the gunpowder residue inside the cannon barrel, and using seawater to cool down the outside of the cannon barrel. Therefore, even in the midst of battle, They didn't show the slightest sign of panic. They methodically completed each step. Some of the gunners even learned to use the distance between their thumbs and their eyes to increase the accuracy of their long-range attacks. The Eye of Arcane was moving at full speed. In the blink of an eye, it had rushed into the middle of the enemy's warships. Just as it brushed past two enemy ships, the corners of Andre's mouth curled up slightly. A chilling sneer flashed across his face. He raised his right hand and suddenly lowered it. At the same time, he loudly ordered, "Fire! Fire! Captain's orders! Ha ha! Bastards of Bacaro City, have a good taste of the power of the great alchemy weapon. Go to hell! Blow them up!" After the sailors let out unbridled taunts and curses, the gunners did not hesitate to ignite the fuses. The 60 bronze cannons on both sides of the ship finally revealed their ferocious faces, spewing out the flames of death and fear. Boom! 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 As the Eye of Arcane cut through the middle of the enemy's ships, the distance between the two sides was very close. Everyone could clearly see wood chips flying from the opposite ship, and the scene of the crew being instantly smashed into meat paste by solid lead bullets. Even the rumbling of the cannons could not cover up the screams of pain and despair. Those with good eyesight could even see the fear flowing from the eyes of the sailors on the other side. Before the invention of the ironclad technology, no ship could withstand the bombardment of 30 24-pound bronze cannons at such a close distance. Even a warship with a displacement of more than 1,000 tons could not do so. The soldiers, warriors, and knights on the other side, who were ready to engage in hand-to-hand combat, were all in disbelief. They then took off their armor and jumped into the boats in a panic, because they found that the warship under their feet was tilting and sinking rapidly. If they were wearing armor, they would undoubtedly sink to the bottom like a piece of iron. As for the captains on the two warships, they were even more dumbfounded. They could not believe that their top warship could not even withstand a single blow and was about to sink to the bottom of the sea. Shocked. Not only were they shocked, but the other three warships were also scared out of their wits when they saw this scene. Especially those veteran captains who were proficient in naval warfare. Their faces were as black as the bottom of a pot. Andre, who commanded the Eye of Arcane to launch a perfect attack, smirked slightly. He raised his right hand again and shouted, "Full rudder to the port. Fill the cannons with grape shot. Hang the blood flag. Tell them to surrender, or be sunk. There is no second choice." Hee. Did you hear the captain? Hang the blood flag. Let those idiots who tried to encircle and annihilate us throw down their weapons, take off their armor, and come to the deck to surrender. Otherwise, we will send them all to the bottom of the sea to feed the fishes. Bartholomew repeated Andre's words with a ferocious face. At the same time, he stuck out his tongue and licked his dry lips. He looked like a shark that had smelled blood, giving people a chill down their spines. However, the sailors and barbarian warriors on the ship liked the expression of their vice-captain. They raised their hands high and let out a deafening roar. It was a little like a demonstration, but also a little like a celebration for the upcoming victory. After all, they had sunk many warships and knew that the other side was no match for them. If they did not surrender, the only outcome was to sink to the bottom of the sea. Chapter 393. Unsurprisingly, the captains of the other three ships all chose to surrender. They knew very well that with the speed of their ships, it was impossible for them to escape the pursuit. Similarly, they did not see any chance of victory in the battle. In addition, there were still nobles in the cabin. Naturally, they could not play the game of mutual destruction or self-destruction. As the remaining three warships raised their white flags one after another, the curtain finally fell on the encirclement and counter-encirclement. Without a doubt, Andre and the Eye of Arcane he personally built had once again achieved an overwhelming victory. Apart from a few large holes in the deck, there was not much damage at all. As long as it was repaired later, it would be as good as new. In fact, in the 2 weeks after the second voyage, the number of merchant ships they looted had increased, and they had long attracted the attention of Bacaro City. Today was not the first time they were attacked by a regular navy. Perhaps the crew was a little nervous and afraid at the beginning, but seeing more and more large warships being sunk by them, that little bit of fear in their hearts disappeared, replaced by an extremely strong sense of confidence. Looking at the eyes of the sailors on the deck, it was clear that these guys did not take their opponents seriously at all. It was as if victory was as common as eating and drinking. Watching the captives being shackled and sent to the hold one by one, many of the crew members were pointing and calculating how much ransom the nobles and expensive clothes could pay and how much they would get. As for the powerful knights and warriors, they were sent to another room covered with iron plates and locked up separately. Their destructive power was so great that ordinary wooden cabins were likely to be smashed directly. Therefore, the place where gold, silver, jewels, and other valuables were originally stored was vacated for them to live in. One must know that the first time they were attacked by the warships, they did not realize the seriousness of the situation and still chose to fight hand-to-hand. In the end, they were slaughtered by 3 knights who suddenly rushed out. More than 10 sailors and 5 barbarian warriors were killed on the spot, and more than 20 people were injured. It could be said that the losses were heavy. Since then, everyone on the ship had been ruthless. If they found that the warships did not engage in hand-to-hand combat, they would simply maintain a safe distance and fire. The other party could only hang the white flag and surrender or sink to the bottom to feed the fish. There was no other choice. Just as everyone was busy detaining the captives and counting the spoils of war, a large number of messages popped up in Andre's vision. Without asking, he knew that the reward had finally arrived. Large-scale mission, trade war. You have successfully defeated the 5 warships that came to besiege you, killing more than 600 of their crew members. None of the commanders, including the captain, escaped. Mission evaluation is perfect. Difficulty level, medium. Congratulations. You have received 5,000 EXP. Congratulations. You've obtained a low-level magic item, the anti-detection cloak Silent Whisper. After wearing it, the target will not be detected by any magic when in stealth or invisibility. Congratulations. You have obtained the enchantment blueprint for armor and shield. Sturdy. The magic patterns on the blueprint can make metal, wood, and leather stronger. Your follower, Elven Druid Nina, has completed a mission. Number of missions required to advance to the next level: 0. Congratulations. Your follower has leveled up. Congratulations. Your follower's perceptive sense has been increased by 1 point. Name: Nina. Race: Elf, Forest Elf. Alignment: absolutely neutral. Age: 112 years old, just reached adulthood. Attributes: Strength, 14 Agility, 15 Physique, 11 Intelligence, 10 Perception, 18 Charm, 10 Profession. Druid level 8, required to complete 5 missions to advance to the next level. Number of divine spells available: level 0, 6 level 1, 5 level 2, 4 level 3, for level 4, 3 health points. 52. Healthy. Acquired abilities: Forest Walk, Animal Companion, Dim Vision, Fierce, Attack, Sleep, Immunity, Natural, Spellcasting, Traceless. Steps: Beast Form. Current number of transformations per day: 3. Natural Perception, Understanding Flora and Fauna, Son of the Azure Wolf, Identification and Concoction of Herbs. Druids can easily identify the uses of all plants and apply them to healing. Even if they don't use divine spells, they're also very good healers. Note: your follower has reached the limit of her current level. Unless your own profession level is increased, she can no longer level up. After living at sea for half a month, Andre not only gained a lot of money, but also a variety of goods, captured ships, ransom paid by the captives, and so on. Moreover, the rewards after each battle were also very generous, from experience points to magic items and some enchantment blueprints. It could be said that he had everything he wanted. Most importantly, because every time Nina won a naval battle, it was equivalent to completing a mission, and her level quickly jumped from level 5 to level 8. She was now a powerful spellcaster who had mastered level 4 divine spells of nature. Especially in the area of healing, she could basically meet the needs of most of the time. It should be known that in this world where the medical system was very backward, divine spells could almost be regarded as the only way to save lives, especially for serious external injuries. As long as the spellcaster's level was high enough, it could be healed in minutes, even if the heart was crushed. As long as there was a breath left, it could be saved. At the same time, it could also cure more than 99% of diseases in an instant, which could be called a miracle. Looking at the way the crew looked at Nina, one could tell how much importance these boorish men attached to her. They would even take the initiative to stand up and block arrows for her in battle. It was a kind of respect that came from the bottom of their hearts. Only priests, druids, and soul shamans who had mastered the power of divine spells could have the opportunity to enjoy such treatment. After each treatment, the sailors would take out a portion of gold coins as a thank you gift, respectfully offering it with both hands. Although it was far from the value of standard divine spells, it showed their sincerity. It could be said that with the addition of a powerful druid on board, not only did the crew become braver in battle, but they could also use divine spells to create a large amount of clean water every day. In addition, Andre had prepared a lot of bean sprouts in advance, which completely eliminated the problem of scurvy, so the crew could maintain a balanced nutrition even in the vast sea. There was no need to worry at all. After all, lemons, and the like had not been discovered in this world yet. There were some oranges, but the area around Lincoln City was not the main production area, so they could not be used for long voyages. In fact, not to mention long voyages, they had to be careful even when trading with the cities of the Green Sea Alliance. Otherwise, it would not be long before they died halfway. Chapter 394. Usually, after sailing for 5 days to a week on the sea, they would have to go ashore to replenish themselves with fresh vegetables and fruits. Otherwise, the scurvy disease would quickly spread throughout the ship. Although most of the sailors did not know the cause of the disease, this did not stop them from categorizing it as a curse of the sea. In any case, if they could not set foot on land for a period of time, these guys would become anxious and uneasy. After drifting on the sea for a week or so, the crew of the Mystical became a little restless. Even the vice captain, Bartholomew, suggested returning to the deserted island to rest. However, Andre, who had long been overstimulated by the rewards of the mission, did not care about returning to the deserted island. He sent a few dozen sailors to reluctantly sail the captured ship back. In any case, he had brought 300 extra sailors with him this time, so they could be used. However, as the days of drifting on the sea increased, the sailors were surprised to find that the dreadful scurvy did not break out at all. Their bodies also seemed to be fine. Gradually, rumors began to spread among them that the great Captain Andre had used magic to suppress the curse of the sea. From then on, the people on the ship no longer mentioned going ashore. They happily took up the promising career of being a pirate. In a short 2 weeks, they had earned enough gold to last them for the rest of their lives. Under the stimulation of 20% of the spoils of war, everyone stared at every passing merchant ship with bloodshot eyes. Once they discovered that the ship was flying the flag of Bacaro City, they would immediately pounce on it like a ferocious tiger. No matter how small the ship was, they would still be able to plunder some profits. Just like that, the sailors who had experienced many naval battles and looting grew rapidly. Originally, they were still a little shaky and flustered when operating the bronze cannons and muskets, but now they were like professional gunners or musketeers. They could often complete a reload in 1 or 2 minutes, and their combat ability had greatly improved. Now, the legend of the Mystical had begun to spread in this part of the sea. The merchants and navy of Bacaro City called it the greedy demon from hell. Linton City called it the roaring sea dragon. As for the other city-states, they called it the ship of death. The reason was simple. Once a target was targeted by the eye of Arcane, there was no record of them escaping alive. Basically, as long as they were discovered, they only had 2 choices. One was to lay down their weapons and surrender, and the other was to be sent to the bottom of the sea by the powerful ship's cannons. Most merchants chose the first option, and the warships also chose to surrender after a few attempts. No one would sacrifice their lives for a war that they had no hope of winning, not even knights who were full of honor. Andre heaved a sigh of relief as he watched the knights being locked up in the cabin that was covered with iron plates under the deterrence of the half-demon Eunice. He stuffed the blueprint that he had just received into his pocket and quickly put on the anti-detection cloak, Silent Whispers. Soon, he felt the mysterious magic power flowing on it. Ever since the Eye of Arcane had made its name known, Bakarov City had begun to pay attention to the Eye of Arcane, which had always been patrolling near the trade route. Furthermore, the combat personnel on the warship had become increasingly powerful. Among the 2 warships they had just sunk and 3 captured, they had found a total of 10 feudal knights, 25 warriors above level 3, and 15% of the crew had professions. For the Navy, this was already an inconceivable ratio. It could be seen how much importance the enemy placed on this encirclement. He couldn't imagine how many sailors and barbarian warriors he would have to lose to achieve victory if the enemy got close enough to engage in a melee. Perhaps after this failure was reported back to Bacaro City, the next time they sent out a warship to encircle and annihilate the enemy, they would not only be equipped with feudal knights, but also with mages above rank 5. As someone who had personally participated in the Council of Linen City, Andre was well aware of how the defense mechanisms of most cities in the Green Sea Alliance operated. At the same time, he also understood that the unscrupulous robberies would have to stop for a while. Otherwise, they would attract the attention of the surrounding forces, and it would not be a small skirmish like it was now. After all, although Bacaro City did not have a strong navy like Linen City, it would not be a problem to gather 30 to 50 large warships. In particular, the spellcasters organization in the city, the Cloak of Arcane, had at least 3 mages above rank 9. It might not be a problem to deal with one of them, but if there were 2 or more, they would have no choice but to run. Andre's personality was usually more cautious. He never overestimated his own fighting strength and rarely put himself in danger. Therefore, after a simple consideration of the gains and losses, he immediately decided to take 2 more before the enemy received the news. After that, he would return to the deserted island to recuperate for a period of time. The Arcane Eye's fighting strength might be able to deal with warriors, knights, thieves, and other close combat professions without the ability to fly, but it was still a wooden structure. There was no way it could withstand the power of the fireballs. It did not need too many fireballs. As long as it took more than 2 of them head-on, it would be engulfed in a sea of fire. No amount of fire-extinguishing sand would be of any use. Just as he was secretly calculating how long it would take for Bacaro City to send out the next wave of warships, Bartholomew walked up to him with brisk steps and complained with a face full of dissatisfaction. "Damn it, Your Excellency, there is nothing valuable on these warships at all. Perhaps the most valuable thing is the ship itself. Next is the weapons and armor. There's less than 2,000 gold coins and 15,000 silver coins in cash. I think it's the leftovers from purchasing supplies and paying salaries." "Haha, relax, my dear Vice Captain. Isn't it within our expectations that the warships are not worth much? Let's follow the old rules and distribute the cash first, then send a few reliable sailors to bring the ship back to the island," Andre said with a smile and a shrug of his shoulders. "All right, we'll do as you say. Anyway, that's all we can do for now. Please don't worry about the issue of manpower. I'll select a few loyal fellows who have served us for many years to take charge of this matter. I guarantee that there won't be any accidents." After saying that, Bartholomew placed one hand on his chest and bowed slightly. He then turned around and waved at a few of the older crew members. After that, he said something in a low voice, and a few of them quickly showed expressions of wild joy. Half an hour later, more than 50 sailors left the Arcane Eye and drove the 3 warships slowly in the direction of the deserted island. Not long after, they disappeared at the end of the sea. Chapter 395. Since this wasn't the first time they had done such a thing, most of the crew didn't have much of a reaction to it. Basically, they ate and drank as usual. After all, the plundering of the ship had left them with ample supplies, unlike other ships that were rationed. Regardless of whether it was bacon, sausages, cheese, bread, or all sorts of inferior ale, wine, and honey wine, they were all freely provided. The only requirement was that they couldn't eat too much and couldn't get drunk. Otherwise, they would be whipped and hung from the mast. Andre knew that the long-term patrol at sea couldn't be as strict in terms of discipline as on land. He had to let the crew relax at appropriate times, and drinking and eating were the simplest and most effective methods. Someone once said that there were only two kinds of sailors in the world. One was the sober drunkards, and the other was the drunkards. As for those who didn't drink, perhaps there wasn't even a single one in the vast sea, unless it was someone like Andre who was extremely disgusted with alcohol. Even Chloe, who didn't like drinking, drank mouthful after mouthful of dark red wine in order to relieve the psychological pressure of killing people. This pampered noble girl had killed more than 10 enemies in a short 2 weeks. To a kind-hearted girl like her, there was no doubt that this was a huge mental blow. Fortunately, Andre was there to counsel her, and the boorish men on the ship kept saying that this was a manifestation of bravery. Thus, the girl didn't develop any psychological problems and slowly got over it. Now, she was able to adapt to the discomfort of killing her own kind. Although it sounded cruel, it was also for her own good. After all, Chloe yearned for excitement and adventure. She had to learn to face the cruelest side of the world bit by bit. She had to experience a true life and death battle. Her opponents weren't only beasts, monsters, and undead, but also humans, elves, halflings, dwarves, and other intelligent creatures of civilized society. Being a qualified adventurer was not an easy thing to do. Fighting and surviving in the wild were only one aspect of it. Another aspect was the mutual deception, intrigue between fellow adventurers. The slightest carelessness could lead to falling into the enemy's trap, especially for such a beautiful girl like her. Once she became a prisoner, she would definitely face a fate worse than death. Holding a bottle of premium wine in one hand and a gorgeous dagger in the other, Chloe arched her back and walked gracefully like a cat. She slowly approached from behind with an expression of a child who was about to play a prank. With the increase in her combat experience, she was now able to master stealth, silent movement, picking locks, detecting traps, and swordsmanship. In addition, she also had a variety of gadgets such as hidden arrows, short muskets, small crossbows, arrowheads smeared with strong anesthetic, and exquisite thief's toolkit. Even if a melee job class of level 4 or above were to encounter her, they would inevitably be forced into a fluster. However, these little tricks didn't have any effect on Andre. Before he stepped within 1 meter of her, he smiled and asked without turning his head, "Tell me, what interesting things did you find today?" "Uh-huh, you found out in advance again. How boring. Hurry up and tell me, where did you expose yourself just now?" As Crowley grumbled, he hugged his lover's neck from behind. With a face full of smiles, he intimately rubbed his face against Shi-Yin, just like a kitten trying to please its owner. He appeared both cute and mischievous, especially with his wheat-colored skin that had been exposed to the sun at sea, which looked rather alluring. "It's very simple. Even though your movements were very light and didn't make a single sound, you ignored the position of the sun. Lower your head and carefully observe your feet. Tell me, what did you find?" Andre turned around and stared at the girl's eyes that were filled with curiosity. The simple-minded Crowley subconsciously glanced down and instantly discovered that his shadow had become very long under the illumination of the afternoon sun. It was exactly twice as long as his actual height. He immediately revealed an expression of realization as he softly cursed. "Oh, damn it. I actually forgot about this." Andre gently kissed the girl's forehead and warned with a smile, "Remember, don't rely too much on skills or fighting ability. Sometimes they can be very deceiving and make you feel that your actions are foolproof. Learn to pay more attention and observe more and use more environmental factors. Otherwise, you will never become an outstanding bard." "All right, I will pay attention. At least I will never ignore the direction of the light again, Chloe said as she shrugged her shoulders unwillingly. She was very clear that she was born a little careless. It was impossible to not make any mistakes. She could only try to reduce the number of mistakes as much as possible. At least she had to make sure that she wouldn't be discovered so easily like today. Hee, it doesn't matter if you make mistakes. It's fine as long as you remember the lessons and correct them. By the way, where did you get that dagger inlaid with emeralds in your hand? Seeing that the girl's eyes revealed a look of annoyance, Andre decisively changed the topic. He had already seen the girl's angry look after being embarrassed, so he didn't intend to see it again in a short period of time. It had to be said that this was a very wise choice. Chloe only used a few seconds to throw the unpleasant failure to the back of her mind. She pulled out the sharp dagger and excitedly explained, "This dagger was found on the body of a captain named Cannon. It is said to be an antique from more than 1,500 years ago. It was forged by the mountain dwarves with cold iron at a low temperature. It is very, very sharp." "Oh, cold iron? Let me see it quickly." Upon hearing that it was a magical metal, Andre's eyes instantly lit up. He directly reached out his hand and asked for the dagger. After coming to this world, he had seen a lot of metals that had never appeared on Earth. For example, adamantine that was as hard as diamonds, and mithril that was as light as wood, but was extremely sharp. However, this was the first time he had seen cold iron. This metal that was buried deep underground was world famous because of its special effect on soul and soul creatures. In order to maintain its characteristics, it needed to be forged at a low temperature. The craftsmanship was so complicated that only the best blacksmiths could master it. Moreover, the production was very low. Most of the production areas were in the underground world known as the Underdark. Due to the difficulty of obtaining the raw materials, it was very rare to see armor or weapons made of cold iron on the surface world. Moreover, the price was only slightly cheaper than adamantine and was almost the same as mithril. It was a weapon that could cause great damage to spiritual creatures, even if it wasn't coated with magic or holy water. Chapter 396. Here, Chloe placed the precious dagger in her lover's hand without even thinking about it. Her large eyes flickered as if she was anticipating something. But unfortunately, Andre didn't pay attention to the girl's expectant gaze and focused all his attention on the dagger. He first simply observed the decorative gem on it, and after confirming that there were no enchantments, he quickly pulled it out of the scabbard. A cold silver light flashed in the air, and he immediately felt the surrounding temperature drop rapidly. It was as if he wasn't holding a dagger made of metal, but a block of ice. Achoo! 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 Andre couldn't help but sneeze 3 times in a row. He then rubbed his nose and extended 2 fingers to gently stroke the surface of the dagger. An indescribable cold sensation quickly transmitted to his brain, and his whole body couldn't help but shiver. Cold. Extremely cold. It was as if he was touching an ice block. He simply couldn't imagine how this metal could maintain such a low temperature in an environment of more than 35 degrees. No matter how much heat it absorbed, it didn't have the slightest reaction. It didn't conform to the physics of heat transfer at all. "My dear, how is it? Did you find anything special?" Chloe, who had been standing at the side for a long time, finally couldn't hold back her restless curiosity and leaned over to ask softly. It's stronger than steel, but not at the level of adamantine. It's also not as light and sharp as mithril. I keep feeling like I've seen this metal somewhere before." Andre explained while furrowing his brows in deep thought. He could vaguely feel that this cold sensation was a bit familiar, as if he had seen it not long ago, but he couldn't remember what it was for the time being. At this moment, Eunice happened to walk past the two. Andre looked up and immediately noticed a shield on her back. His eyes instantly lit up, and he immediately clapped his hands. "Damn it! I was wondering why it was so familiar." It turns out that the outermost layer of Clive Crom's magic shield was mixed with some cold iron. No wonder its defensive power is so strong. Ever since he forcefully confiscated the shield of the trainee knight, he had studied it for a while. After thoroughly understanding the enchantment technique inside, he directly threw it to the half-demon to use. After all, as a demonkin warrior, what could he do without a proper shield? One had to know that her main mission was not to kill as many enemies as possible, but to ensure the safety of her teammates. How could she recklessly charge into the crowd with a whip in one hand and a sword in the other and cause a storm of blood? Under Andre's insistence, Eunice was forced to give up her beloved whip and began to use the combination of sword and shield. Especially after the frequent battles these days, she had become proficient in using the shield in a very short period of time. She was now a rather outstanding defender. Of course, the powerful defensive ability of the magic shield was also one of the reasons. Anyone who obtained a magic item would treasure it very much. Paying a small price for it was definitely worth it. Outstanding hardness, ductility, fire protection ability brought about by ultra-low temperatures. Plus, it can cause great damage to spiritual beings. It is indeed a good magic metal. Perhaps the only drawback is that it is very troublesome to forge. Muttering softly to himself, Andre put the dagger back into the sheath embedded with gems and returned it to Chloe, reminding her, "Put it away carefully. It is a very precious weapon. Although it is a bit short, it can definitely play a decisive role if you encounter monsters like ghosts." "Really? Wow. I thought it was just a gorgeous ornament. I didn't expect it to have such an effect." Chloe cried out in wild joy. She was like a little girl who got something fun. She skipped over to Eunice and proudly showed off her spoils of war. Looking at the happy girl, Andre suddenly felt a little envious. At the same time, he felt that it was not a good thing to be too smart, because once the intelligence exceeded a certain level, the brain would become unprecedentedly developed. Perhaps ordinary people could casually answer that 1 + 1 = 2, but he would unconsciously think about why 1 + 1 = 2, why it was not 0, why it was 3, why it was 1, why it was 10 in daily life. A drop of water plus a drop of water equals a bigger drop of water. A pile of soil plus a pile of soil equals a bigger pile of soil in logical calculations. 1 + 1 also equals 1. In the binary calculation commonly used by computers, 1 + 1 = 10. In short, similar knowledge that defied common sense could be said to be countless. The only theory that could prove that 1 + 1 = 2 was the famous Goldbox conjecture. In fact, ever since Andre's intelligence exceeded the human limit, 18, his brain had undergone a certain degree of mutation. He could feel a special energy flowing into every single one of his brain cells, allowing him to reach the level of supermemory. As long as he put his heart into remembering something, he would never forget it unless he took the initiative to delete it from his memory. In addition, his learning ability, logical thinking, understanding of abstract concepts, reaction speed, and so on all increased geometrically. Everything had its advantages and disadvantages. Although he had obtained so many benefits, there were also a lot of troubles. The most important one was that no matter when or where, the brain was always in a divergent state of thinking. No matter what happened around him, it would involuntarily produce a lot of associations, inferences, and predictions. It was like a sophisticated supercomputer constantly calculating at every moment, even when he was sleeping and dreaming. Fortunately, Andre's will was strong enough. Otherwise, sooner or later, he would be driven crazy. In fact, there were already signs of schizophrenia. In addition, the fire elemental bloodline would occasionally cause trouble, which made him have the urge to vomit blood. He could only put all his energy into various kinds of work in order to relieve his mental pressure. On one side was a calm and rational personality. On the other side was a passionate and unrestrained nature hidden in the bloodline. These two extreme contradictions appeared in a person at the same time. Even if it was not as bad as a comet hitting the Earth, it had to be said that this situation was quite troublesome, especially the strong desire and impulse in the heart, which undoubtedly caused a great impact on one's rationality. If he did not have the experience of 2 lifetimes, he would have been completely immersed in money, power, and beauty, unable to extricate himself. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.